Hi everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. I hope you're doing well tonight. If you enjoy the stories in this video, please give it a like. And if you have any strange or unexplained experiences of your own, you can send them to me. Tonight we're starting with a story about churches, shadows, and a basement that didn't feel right at all. It's one of those experiences that stays with you, even years later. So settle in, listen along, and I hope you sleep well tonight. I grew up in the Bible Belt, so church was just part of life. I was taken to services all through childhood, mostly Methodist and Baptist churches. I remember stepping inside a Catholic church once when I was very young, but the memory is hazy, more like a photograph left in the sun. I also went to one of those big, modern evangelical churches at one point, the kind that feels almost like a shopping mall. Honestly, the most supernatural thing about that place was looking around and thinking, wait, why is there a coffee shop in here? I haven't been inside a church in years now, but sometimes, when I think back on it, there are certain moments that still hook into my curiosity. A part of me wonders what I'd feel if I walked into one again. Would it feel normal? Would it feel empty? Or would I notice the same strange things I noticed back then? When I was around 12, I was already starting to doubt a lot of what I'd been taught. Christianity had begun to feel full of cracks to me. One thing that always bothered me was prayer. I would sit there silently, trying so hard to feel connected to God, and nothing ever answered back. I know some people might say actually hearing God would be terrifying, or maybe even dangerous, depending on how literally you take the Bible. But from the way everyone talked about having a relationship with Him, I thought I might at least get one quiet moment that felt real. I remember one service where a woman suddenly dropped to her knees and started sobbing in the middle of the sermon. People rushed around her, excited, saying she had felt the touch of God. They placed their hands on her like they were hoping some of it would pass into them too. I just stood there, watching. I remember feeling unsettled, not just uncomfortable, but deeply out of place. It was a small church, and somehow it felt even smaller in that moment. I had this strange feeling that something was watching the whole thing unfold from somewhere behind the pews. Not watching with reverence either, more like it was amused. I couldn't prove that feeling came from anything outside of me. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe it was dissociation. Maybe it was just a kid realizing the world didn't feel the way adults promised it would. But after that, I started questioning everything more seriously, especially because there were already things happening outside of church that felt paranormal to me. Crosses and prayers didn't stop them, no matter how much I believed they should. After a while, sitting through church became harder and harder. I started choosing the very back pew whenever I could. Part of it was because I didn't want anyone bothering me, but part of it was because I wanted to watch. I wanted to see if there was a reason my gut kept telling me something else was there. At some point, I noticed shadows near one of the doors inside the church. They looked almost human-shaped. I couldn't see eyes or faces, nothing that told me where they were looking, but I felt them looking straight back at me. They didn't move. They just stood there. And when I looked away and then looked back, they were gone. That hit me harder than I expected. I had been told my whole life that a church was God's house, that nothing bad could enter it, that it was protected. But whatever those shadows were, they didn't seem impressed by that idea. Back then, that shattered something in me. I wanted to believe it was only that one church. Maybe that building was different. Maybe something was wrong with it. Since I was still a kid, I couldn't just visit other churches whenever I wanted, so I waited for chances when my family would go somewhere else. Eventually, one of those chances came. A relative was getting married out of state, and the ceremony was being held at a church. It was medium-sized, I think Baptist, and during the event, 2 of my cousins and I started wandering around. We found a stairwell leading down to a basement level. At the bottom were 2 large doors with little windows in them. Behind the glass, everything looked dark. My cousins immediately got creeped out. I dared them to come with me, but they refused. They stayed near the top of the stairs, whispering that they didn't want any part of it. So I went down alone. I honestly thought the doors would be locked, since most of the other rooms we had tried were closed off. But these opened right away. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was floral, but not in a fresh way. It was heavy and sweet, almost sickening, like too many funeral flowers packed into a room with no air. Beyond the doors was a dim hallway. There were tiny lamps here and there, lighting little patches of wall and floor, but most of the space was swallowed by shadow. My heels clicked against the white tile, and the sound echoed so sharply that it made me want to freeze. I remember trying to walk quietly, because it felt wrong to disturb the silence down there. That's the only way I can describe it. It felt like the quiet belonged to something. The farther I went, the more my head hurt from that thick floral smell. I kept passing small pools of lamplight, and every instinct in me was telling me to turn around. But I was stubborn, and I wanted proof. I wanted to know whether churches really felt protected, or whether something else could live inside them too. At the end of the hallway, I reached another dim seating area. Past it, there was another hall, but that one was completely black. The second I looked into that darkness, every part of me screamed. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't imagination gently tapping my shoulder. It was pure animal instinct, the kind buried somewhere ancient in the body. Something in me knew, or believed it knew, that there was something in that dark, and if I stayed there, I was in danger. So I ran. I ran back through that basement in my ridiculous heels, somehow without falling, with the sound of my own footsteps exploding around me. I made it up the stairs, breathless and shaking. My cousins weren't even there anymore. They had gone back to the wedding party. Everything upstairs was normal. People were talking, laughing, eating, celebrating. Meanwhile, my heart was still pounding like I had escaped something. My family stayed in town one more night to visit with relatives. It was actually a nice evening. Nothing strange happened while I was awake. But that night, I dreamed I was back in that exact basement, standing at the edge of that black hallway. In the dream, I couldn't see what was there. I could only feel myself being attacked in the dark. I don't usually have nightmares immediately after something scares me, so that stayed with me. It felt too specific, too connected. I've never had another church experience quite as intense as that one, but I still can't shake the feeling that churches hold something I don't fully understand. Maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's the atmosphere. Maybe it's the weight of all those people praying, grieving, confessing, begging, and hoping in the same space for years and years. But to me, churches have always felt haunted in their own way. And sometimes I wonder whether abandoned churches are worse, or whether active ones are stranger, because everyone assumes they're safe. I want to tell you about my grandfather, though calling him that still feels strange, because I never really knew him. He died when I was a baby, so I don't have memories of him the way other people might. What I have are the stories people told, the silence people kept, and the times I believe he showed himself. For privacy, I'll call him Ivor. Ivor inherited an old family farm that had been passed down for generations. It was the kind of place people in town talked about with respect, even pride. But inside the family, it was something different. He was cruel, arrogant, and violent, especially toward my father. Part of that hatred came from something my father didn't even know until he was around 50 years old. Ivor wasn't his biological father. My grandmother, who I'll call Pearl, had been involved with another man before she married Ivor. From what I understand, he was a traveling country musician, and the relationship was short, volatile, and frightening enough that Pearl's parents stepped in to scare him off. Pearl was young and pregnant with my dad when it ended. The strange part is that my dad's real father apparently sent birthday gifts for years. Pearl never gave them to him. She hid them away in the attic, where they sat for decades, collecting dust. Eventually, Pearl married Ivor, and they had 2 sons together. I'll call them Arden and Miles. Ivor treated my father and Arden terribly. He worked them hard on the farm, and from what I've been told, he beat my father with whatever was nearby, sometimes even metal tools. But to the people in town, Ivor was a respected Christian family man. Someone helpful, someone generous, someone good. That's the part that has always unsettled me. How a person can be one thing in public and something entirely different behind closed doors. Arden was younger than my father, and while he suffered too, I think he had just enough room to become himself. He was artistic. His drawings used to hang in Pearl's house and in my father's home. I barely knew him because he left as soon as he could and built a life far away in New York. I heard he worked restoring old stone figures, things like gargoyles, which always felt oddly fitting to me. Then there was Miles. Miles came along much later, and from everything I've heard, Ivor adored him. He was funny, bold, spontaneous, the kind of kid who could make people laugh without trying. He was also spiritual in a way that seemed unusual for someone so young. My dad once told me Miles wrote a poem about going to heaven. I never got to read it, but I've thought about it more than once. One day, Miles brought some friends out to the farm. They had recently watched Teen Wolf, and there was a scene where Michael J. Fox rides on top of a car like he's surfing. Miles wanted to do that. He wanted that same wild, reckless freedom. So his friends got into one of the farm trucks, and Miles climbed onto the hood. They drove down a country road. For a few moments, I imagine he felt fearless. Then the driver hit the brakes. Miles flew off the hood and struck his head on the road. He died right there. I never met him, but his absence was one of those things that lived in the house like another person. You could feel the shape of the hole he left. After that, Ivor blamed my father for Miles's death. I don't know how that made sense to him, but grief and cruelty can twist together in ugly ways. Their relationship became even worse. By then, my father had children of his own, including my brother and eventually me, and he was still trying to hold on to the farm, no matter how badly Ivor treated him. Then Ivor gave my father an ultimatum: leave the farm with his family, or else. My father had only a couple of days before everything would be taken from him. And then Ivor died. He was electrocuted while working on the water pump. Supposedly, he forgot to shut off the power at the box nearby. The town mourned him, but my family didn't. My father said he had been in another town getting supplies when it happened, though I've never known what to believe. The farm was remote. Emergency responders would have taken a long time to get there, especially back then. My father was the one who found Ivor's body. Later, he used to point out the place near the pump and the power box, explaining how Ivor had forgotten to turn it off. There was something in his voice when he said it. Not exactly joy, more like a cold satisfaction he tried to bury, but couldn't. After Ivor died, he didn't leave the farm. My brother was the first one to see him. He was about 12, staying overnight at Pearl's house. In the middle of the night, he woke up to the sound of snoring. When he looked over, he saw Ivor sleeping in his old reclining chair, glowing blue. My brother didn't scream. He just pulled the blankets over his head and tried to go back to sleep. My father believed the farm was haunted too, though he didn't talk about it much. I remember him mentioning gates moving on their own out in the pasture, but he never liked to go into detail. Pearl denied everything. completely. She was always cold about it, almost sharp. If you told her something happened, she'd shut it down immediately. Maybe she didn't want to believe Ivor was still there. Maybe she knew more than she ever said. I can't know for sure. The first time I encountered him, I was around 12 too. Some horses that didn't belong to us had wandered into the front yard of Pearl's house. She went outside to move them along, and I sat on the front porch to watch. The front door was behind me. After a few minutes, I heard a man's voice behind me. It was angry, low, guttural. At the same time, this cold rush of air went straight through me from the direction of the door. I screamed and ran toward Pearl. When I tried to tell her what happened, she said it was only the wind. But it was summer. There was no wind hitting me from where I sat, and the cold came from behind me, from the closed door. Closed doors don't breathe voices. There was another night I believe I saw him in my own house. I heard moaning in the hallway, and when I looked, there was an old man standing near my bedroom door. The door was open wider than I had left it. He was tall and thin, almost bent over. His face was bony. His hair and beard looked dry and stringy, like old straw. His eyes were sunken but sharp. He had that same blue glow my brother described, but around the edges of him, there were streaks of orange, almost smeared like paint. The last time I saw Ivor was during the day. I was running around the farm with my old best friend. We were probably ghost hunting, or at least pretending to. We were kids, and we already knew the place had a reputation, so we were doing what curious kids do. Behind Pearl's house, there was an old white shack with peeling paint. It was full of junk and half falling apart. I had seen it plenty of times before, and it never bothered me. But that day, everything stopped. My friend and I were laughing. Then suddenly we both went quiet and looked toward the shack. There was a dusty window, cloudy and cluttered from the inside, but behind the glass, I saw a face. Ivor's face. He wasn't glowing that time. He looked pale, gray, and dead. His eyes looked like empty sockets, but somehow they were furious. My friend screamed before I did. My brother was nearby on a tractor, and we ran for him. We cut across fences and pasture lands so fast we could have gotten hurt. He was angry because we could have been run over, but he let us climb into the tractor anyway. We stayed with him while he fed the cattle. For a long time, I forgot that part. I think it scared me so badly my mind packed it away. Years later, my brother mentioned that there had been a day when my friend and I came running to him, quiet and shaken, insisting we stay on the tractor. That brought it all back. I haven't seen Ivor since, and honestly, I'm grateful. I haven't stepped foot on that farm in about 10 years. A few years ago, my brother told me Ivor appeared in one of his dreams, begging him to come back. The farm has been falling apart ever since we left it, and I don't know whether that place is haunted, cursed, or just soaked through with everything that happened there. But I know this much. Some places remember. And that farm remembers everything. I want to tell you about something that happened years ago, back when I was still a kid living out in the middle of nowhere. Around 2008, my stepmother had this habit of bringing home strange things. She loved yard sales, flea markets, estate sales, antique shops, little vendor booths at fairs, anything like that. If something looked old or unusual, she would buy it without much thought. One day, she came home with this tall, narrow mirror. I don't remember exactly where she got it, but I remember hearing that it had come from an old medical building, maybe a hospital. I'm not completely sure if that part was true, but she seemed proud of it, like it made the mirror more interesting. It was a skinny, full-length mirror with a plain border, nothing fancy. But the way it was placed made everything worse. It sat at the very end of our hallway, almost perfectly filling the wall. That hallway was long, tight, and uncomfortable, with bedrooms, bathrooms, an office, and the laundry room branching off from it. There were doorways on both sides near the mirror too, so when you looked down the hall, the reflection seemed to stretch forever. You couldn't really avoid looking at it. Every time I came out of my room or walked through that part of the house, there I was, far away in the glass, standing in that thin, reflected hallway. At first, it was just a feeling, that heavy, watched feeling, like the house was holding its breath. Then the footsteps started. They usually began after everyone had gone to bed, sometime between 9 and 11 at night. I was a kid, and I kept my bedroom door cracked open for my cats. I would be lying there in the dark, trying to sleep, and then I'd hear it. Slow, heavy shuffling from the end of the hallway. Back and forth. Back and forth. It sounded like someone dragging their feet across the floor, pacing from one end of the hall to the other. Whenever the steps got close to my door, I would freeze. I'd barely breathe. I remember staring at that little crack in my door, waiting to see if it would open wider. Sometimes the footsteps went on for hours. Sometimes they stopped around midnight. Other nights, I would wake up around 3 in the morning and hear them again. Nobody in my family ever seemed to hear it. Whenever I asked, they brushed it off. But when friends stayed over, they heard it too. One night, my friend Mara was sleeping over, and the sounds started earlier than usual. We were whispering to each other, asking, "Do you hear that?" And then this low, drawn-out moan came from right outside my bedroom door. It sounded like an old man, tired and angry at the same time. Mara grabbed my arm and whispered for me to be quiet. We pulled the blankets over our heads, but I looked. I don't know why. I think by then I had gotten used to being scared, and curiosity got tangled up in it. The door had opened wider. I didn't see a solid person exactly. It was more like colors smeared together in the shape of someone old and thin, blue and orange, almost like wet paint moving in the dark. I could make out a bony face, a beard, and these sharp eyes looking through the doorway. I dropped back under the covers and stayed there. We whispered about anything else we could think of until we finally fell asleep. After a while, I got used to it in a strange way. I knew I wasn't going to sleep anyway, so I'd sneak my laptop under the blankets and watch movies with headphones in. The footsteps became part of the house, like creaking pipes or wind against the walls, except I knew it wasn't that. Then other mirrors started bothering me. In 6th grade, some girls at school locked me in the bathroom with the lights off and told me I had to do the Bloody Mary ritual before they'd let me out. I was terrified of the dark, and I just wanted to leave, so I did it. I turned 3 times and faced the mirror. The reflection looking back wasn't mine. I had wild, frizzy hair back then, but the figure in the mirror had smooth, straight hair. The shape was wrong. The posture was wrong. I screamed and shoved the bathroom door open hard enough to knock the girls away. They laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, but I knew what I had seen. Not long after that, I was home alone putting laundry away. My parents' room was across from mine, so I only had to cross the hallway with the basket. I suddenly felt watched, and I turned toward the mirror. There was something in it. It was pressed close to the glass, blocking where my reflection should have been. Just a dark shape, but wrong in a way I don't like describing. I don't want to give it too much detail, even now. I'll just say it didn't look human. I screamed, ran into my room, and slammed the door. Then I panicked even harder because I had a mirror in my room too. I thought it might show up there next. It didn't. Not that day. But after that, I'd see shadows move across mirrors. Quick shapes. Little flashes that disappeared before I could fully understand what I was seeing. And eventually, whatever it was didn't stay tied to that hallway anymore. My parents were divorced, and my mom lived about an hour away in the city. I saw her on weekends, and I started seeing it there too. By the time I was around 14 or 15, it changed. Sometimes it still looked horrifying, but sometimes it appeared as this strangely attractive young man with features that weren't quite human. The first time I remember seeing it like that, I was at my mom's apartment. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night and sat straight up before I even knew why. It was sitting on my dollhouse like it was a chair. It looked directly at me and grinned. I didn't scream. I was too confused and too scared. I just stared at it for a second, then slowly lay back down and pretended to sleep. I kept my eyes shut until real sleep finally took over. During my teens, I started thinking of it as my stalker. I didn't really tell people about it, not fully. It followed me everywhere, or at least it felt like it did. It stopped scaring me in the same way after a while. The feeling shifted, and I hate saying this, but sometimes it felt almost comforting, especially in that awful farmhouse where I often felt alone. I don't know how much of that was real, and how much was my mind trying to survive isolation. Maybe I gave it too much meaning because I needed something to cling to. Maybe it fed off that. I still don't know. The last major thing that happened with the hallway mirror was when I was 17. It was the middle of the day. I was walking through the house, nothing unusual, and while I was still in view of the mirror, I suddenly felt this sharp pain in my chest. It felt like something had pierced straight through me. I dropped to my knees because breathing hurt so badly. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Years later, after getting sick, I developed chest inflammation that causes pain in that exact same spot. Maybe it's coincidence. I hope it is. But whenever cold air makes that pain flare up, I remember that moment in the hallway. When I turned 18, I left that house. But the thing didn't leave me right away. For a few more years, I still felt it around. I started emotionally pulling away from it because deep down, I knew it wasn't good for me. Eventually, when I got into a real relationship with a living person, it seemed to lose its grip. Not quietly, though. There were still little incidents. Once, I bent down to pick something up and felt a hand grab me from behind, even though nobody was there. When I talked to my boyfriend on the phone, the call would sometimes cut out, and when it came back, he'd ask if I had heard that awful screeching or roaring sound. I never told him the whole story. I only gave him pieces. And now, honestly, I'm glad it's gone. I haven't dealt with it in years. I still think about that mirror sometimes, that long hallway, those footsteps, the way my reflection never felt like it belonged to me when I looked too long. But whatever followed me from that place, it finally let go. I'm 42 now, but there's one night from when I was little that I still remember with frightening clarity. I must have been about 4 years old, and my younger brother Jame was around 2. We shared a bedroom back then, each of us in our own twin bed. His sheets had spaceships and little movie characters all over them, and mine were bright and cheerful, covered in rainbow colors and cartoon faces. It was the kind of room that should have felt safe. Our beds were lined up beside each other, both facing this tall closet across the room. The closet was long, but not very deep, and the bedroom door was just to the left of it. I was lying in bed playing with my little berry-scented doll when I heard my brother start to whimper. It was quiet at first, this soft, muffled crying from the bed to my right. Even at that age, I was a little mother hen. Without even looking over, I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer with words. He just sobbed. So I put my doll down and started walking toward him. I remember being halfway between our beds when he lifted one tiny shaking finger and pointed at the closet. Then he buried his face and started crying harder, really crying, like something had scared him beyond anything he knew how to explain. I stopped where I was and looked where he was pointing, and what I saw has stayed with me my whole life. There, inside our closet, was a figure. The only way I can describe it is a tall, man-shaped absence of light. It was huge, easily over 6.5 feet tall, maybe taller, and it looked like it was wearing some kind of long coat that hung down past its knees. On its head was a small, rounded hat, almost like something from an old western. There were no details, no fabric, no skin, no features, just the outline. But the face was different. Where its eyes and mouth should have been, there were these swirling colors, almost like heat waves or energy moving in circles. The place where its mouth should have been was stretched wide open, like it was screaming at us with everything it had. But there was no sound. None. Looking back now, I also realized there was a shelf built into the top of that closet, and this thing was standing right through it. Not in front of it, through it. There was no normal way for anything that tall to be standing there. But that wasn't even the worst part. Down near its right knee, crouched low on the floor, was something else. Another creature. The moment I saw it, I lost control of my bladder. I just stood there and wet myself completely. I was so terrified I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe properly. I was frozen in the middle of our bedroom, soaked and shaking, staring at this thing. It was smaller than the tall figure, but still shaped almost like a person. Only it was wrong, more animal than human. It was down on all fours, tense, like it was about to sprint straight at me. And the taller one seemed to be holding it back. That's the feeling I got. Like the tall shadow had brought it there. Like someone holding back a dog on a leash. My brother was screaming by then, and I guess our parents heard him because suddenly they came rushing in. I remember each of them picking one of us up, trying to calm us down. At first, I still couldn't make a sound, but once my voice came back, I screamed. I mean, really screamed. The kind of scream that doesn't sound like it could come from a child. My dad was holding me, and I remember pressing into him thinking he would make everything okay. I can still remember the smell of his cold leather jacket. It was the early 80s, and he rode motorcycles, so that smell was always around him. But his back was facing the closet, and when I looked over his shoulder, I could still see the tall man standing there, with those swirling eyes and that wide, silent, screaming mouth. I tried to show them. My brother tried too. We both pointed. We both cried. But our parents couldn't see anything. That night, my dad slept in our room because we absolutely refused to sleep without him there. A couple of years later, we moved to a different state, and I thought maybe whatever that was had been left behind. It hadn't. The same figure came back, only this time, there were no swirling colors in its face, no strange eyes, no screaming mouth. It was just pure darkness in the shape of a man. And for years, it terrorized me. Sometimes it would stand in the corner of my room while I lay in bed, watching me. Sometimes it would glide down the hallway past my door and turn its head toward me as it went by. Other times, it would peek around my doorway from up near the ceiling, as if it were lying flat above the doorframe. I would see its head and that hat slowly appear from the top corner, then slide back out of sight. I know how strange that sounds. I know. But I was there. I was a child, and I was terrified almost every night. I started having horrible nightmares, though calling them nightmares feels too small. They were more like night terrors, and I truly believed this thing caused them. One of the worst ones was of that figure using a meat hook on my sister and hanging her from the bathroom door. Another dream had these little hooded beings crawling out of a hole beneath a huge live oak tree in our backyard, catching cats and eating them. My childhood was full of fear in a way I still don't fully know how to talk about. And before anyone asks, I wasn't allowed to watch scary movies. I only watched cartoons and gentle kids shows. Nothing that would have put images like that in my head. At least not that I can remember. Nobody really believed me. Nobody except my brother. And this might sound odd, but I gave the tall shadow man a name. I called him Cotterhead. I don't know why. I don't remember deciding it. That was just his name to me. Every night, I would cry and beg my dad not to make me go to bed. I would tell him, Cotterhead is going to come. And every night he would say, it's just a dream. But I knew it wasn't. I want to tell you a few stories my grandmother used to share with me, and I can still hear the way she told them. She grew up in Arkansas, in a little place tucked into the river valley, down near the foot of the Ozarks. The kind of place where everybody knew the land, and the land seemed to know everybody right back. She always said these things happened. Not maybe, not could have been. She swore they were true. The first thing she used to talk about was from when she was a girl picking cotton. A lot of families in the South have stories like that. Grandparents or great-grandparents working those long, hot rows. She said that sometimes, while the kids were out in the fields, they'd see a big black cat standing near the edge of the tree line. Not a house cat. Not anything ordinary. It would just watch them. Her daddy would take a shot at it now and then, but he never hit it. The thing would bolt off into the brush, and later that night, they'd hear it scream somewhere out in the dark. My grandmother always said it sounded just like a woman screaming. I never knew what to make of that story, but years later, in 2021, my family and I were driving through that same general part of Arkansas when something large and black crossed the road right in front of us. We all saw it. It moved low and smooth, and then it was gone. I still don't know what it was. Another story she told was about a hill everyone called Iron Ridge Mountain out near Keglesville. Around there, people call them mountains even though most folks would probably call them hills. That was just the way it was. My great-grandfather, whose name was Jack Grayson, was riding horses up there one day with a friend. As they came down a slope, he saw what he described as a ball of fire burst out of the ground and fly right under his friend's horse. Jack hollered for him to look out, but his friend hadn't seen a thing. That night, Jack went home and told my grandmother what happened. She said she knew right then that something bad was coming. About a week later, that friend died in an accident at a sawmill. Now, maybe that was coincidence. Maybe it was just one of those strange things people remember because of what came after. But my grandmother never told it that way. To her, that fire was a warning. There was another time on Iron Ridge when my grandparents had been out cutting firewood. They were heading back down a muddy dirt road, still a few miles from the main highway, when they came up on what looked like a log stretched across the road. My grandmother said it was thick, maybe as wide around as a fence post. My grandfather got out of the truck to move it, and then the log moved on its own. It was a snake. A huge one. She always said it must have been close to 30 feet long. It just slid across the road, slow and calm, not bothering anybody, like it owned that whole patch of earth. And that was the part that troubled her most. Arkansas doesn't have snakes like that. At least, it's not supposed to. Then there was the house near Hector. When my mother was born, my grandparents moved into a small place just outside town. Almost every morning, they'd wake up and find the front door standing open. At night, the bathroom faucet would turn on by itself, and in the morning, there would be wet footprints leading from the bathroom toward the door. They never heard chains rattling, never saw shadows floating around. Nothing dramatic like that. Just the open door, the running water, the footprints. Years later, my mother said a neighbor told her an old woman had lived in that house before them, and people around there had called her a witch. Whether that meant anything or not, I don't know. But nobody in my family ever forgot that house. The last story was about my grandmother's sister, Lenora. Lenora was married to a man named Carl, and they'd been together for more than 30 years. They lived up in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. At some point, an older woman moved into the house across the street. Lenora said from the beginning that something about that woman didn't sit right with her. She couldn't explain it, just a feeling. After a while, Carl started spending more and more time over there. Then Lenora's health began to fail. In the family, people whispered that the woman across the street was a witch and had put something on Lenora so she could take Carl for herself. Lenora eventually passed away. Not long after that, Carl moved in with the woman across the street. They were together for maybe a month and a half. Then one morning, Carl was found dead out in the yard. They said it looked like a heart attack. After he died, the woman wouldn't let any of the family come inside to collect his things. She boxed up what she wanted to give back and left it for them on the porch. The relatives who went to pick it up said the house felt awful from the outside, heavy and wrong somehow. They said the inside looked dark, with hardly any sunlight coming through. Now, I know that story could be explained without anything supernatural at all. People can be cruel. People can betray each other. Sometimes that's enough horror all by itself. But the older folks in my family never saw it that simply. To them, something was wrong there. And when my grandmother told these stories, she never told them to scare me for fun. She told them like she was passing along a little piece of the world as she understood it. A world where the woods had eyes, fire could rise from the ground, and some houses kept breathing long after everyone inside them was gone. I work as the maintenance manager at a large 55-plus apartment community. We've got a little over 800 apartments here, so over the years, I've seen a lot. It's not unusual for me to get called for a welfare check or to go in for a regular service call and find that someone has passed away. It's sad, but in a place like this, it happens. My mornings usually start around 6. I park my truck, grab my coffee and lunch, and walk over to the main fire gates where my work cart is kept. On the way, I wave to the early risers, say good morning, make a little small talk. That part of the day is usually calm. That Monday morning, while I was doing my usual walk-in, I noticed a man standing near the fire gate. He looked younger than most of the residents, maybe mid-40s or so. He was wearing a faded red shirt and blue jeans. He had this distant look about him, almost like he was lost or trying to remember where he was supposed to be. Around here, that doesn't immediately set off alarm bells. Some folks wander, some are waiting for rides, some just like standing outside in the quiet. So I tipped my hat and said, "Good morning." The man looked at me like I had startled him badly. Not scared exactly, but shocked. Like I had done something I wasn't supposed to do. He didn't answer. I kept walking because, honestly, that still wasn't too strange for this place. Some residents keep to themselves. Some are in their own little world. I got to my cart, and when I looked back toward the fire gate, he was still there. He glanced over his shoulder at me with that same strange expression. I nodded to him again. He turned his eyes back toward the gate. Something about it felt odd, but not odd enough for me to stop everything. I just figured he was confused, maybe dealing with dementia, maybe waiting for someone. The next morning, Tuesday, I saw him again. Same place, same time, same red shirt, same jeans. This time he was standing in the middle of the main parking lot entrance, just still as a post. I called out, "Morning, you doing all right?" He didn't turn around fully. He just looked over his shoulder at me. And there it was again, that look. Like I had offended him somehow, but also like he didn't understand what I was doing there. His face was confused, almost irritated. I told myself not to overthink it. Around here, you learn that people have their routines, their habits, and sometimes their own storms going on inside them. Later that afternoon, around 2:30, I got called for a welfare check at an apartment near the fire lane, close to where I had seen that man. When I got to the door, I noticed Meals on Wheels had left 2 missed meal notices hanging there. 2 days worth. That's never a good sign, but it's not always the worst either. Sometimes people don't feel like eating. Sometimes they're in the hospital. Sometimes they just don't answer the door. But when we went inside, I saw him. The same man. He was lying in bed, and it was clear he had been gone for a while. Same face, same build, same man I had seen standing by the gate that morning. Later, when the coroner handed me the paperwork, I looked at the estimated time of death. It said late Sunday night or early Monday morning. I asked if that was right. The coroner looked at me and said he could be even more specific. The man had been wearing a health watch, and it recorded his time of death. Monday morning, 5:51 a.m. I just stood there for a second. Then I said, "No, I saw him this morning." The coroner didn't really know what to say to that. Neither did I. I still don't know exactly what I experienced. I don't know how to explain it in a way that makes sense. All I know is that I saw that man, clear as day, as real as anyone I've ever spoken to. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe his sister. Maybe whoever he thought would come looking for him. Maybe he was standing by that fire gate because some part of him knew that was where help would pass by. I don't know. But after I left work and everything started fitting together, it hit me hard. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The clothes, the time, the way he looked at me, the place where he stood. And when it finally landed, it scared me so badly I had a panic attack. I've found people before. I've dealt with death before. But this was different. Because this time, I'm almost certain I saw someone after they were already gone. I want to tell you about something that's been happening to me for a while now, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. Back in 2021, my family moved into this old trailer park. It's been around for a long time, since my stepdad, who's in his 50s now, was just a kid. He actually used to live there when he was younger. I moved in with them too, because I'm still living at home, and at the time, I was carrying a lot from my past. I was struggling pretty badly then, and I've only really started trying to get better this year. Before we even fully moved in, we were checking the place out. I remember standing there and looking down the hallway, and that's when I saw it for the first time. A pale, round face peeked out at me from behind the bathroom door. It was only there for a second, but I knew what I saw. Later that same year, during summer school, I started seeing the same figure again. For about 3 days straight, it kept showing up. I would be lying in my loft bed, and I'd see its head moving just above the edge of my blankets, like it was peeking over at me. I saw it staring at me from the darkness outside the house, too. There may have been another time, but honestly, some of it is blurry now. Then, a few months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months back, I saw it again. This time, it was behind me in the reflection of my TV. Same face, same shape, same feeling. I ended up naming it Vesper. A few nights ago, around 12:30 at night, I came out of my room to talk with my mom. She was sitting on the couch with a beer, and everyone else was asleep. My little brother was asleep. My little sister was asleep. My stepdad was asleep. It was just me and her in the living room. My mom and I love talking about paranormal stuff. I love hearing her stories, even when they scare me. There's this toy car we have under the coffee table. Its battery is low, so sometimes it makes noise, but not usually in a way that feels strange. That night, my mom was in the middle of telling me a story about my grandmother, who passed away. She was talking about how my grandma once saw this freakishly tall shadow figure wearing a hat, just a few nights after my mom had seen the same thing. My grandma thought it might have been Morley, my grandfather who died back in the 80s, I think. And right when my mom imitated my grandma saying, "Morley, is that you?" the toy car went off. I froze. My mom told me it had already gone off once about an hour before I came out of my room. We grabbed each other's hands and just stared at each other with this scared look. But I started laughing because that's what I do when I'm nervous. Then I said, "If that's you, Vesper, or whoever you are, do it again." And it did. Right after I said it, the toy car went off again. That car has never gone off twice in a row like that. Not ever. Since that night, everything has felt different. I've been having a harder time falling asleep, especially when the house gets completely silent. It's worse when I'm in my room or when I'm walking back down the hallway. That's where the feeling is strongest. And then, just last night, something else happened. It was around 11, and I was going to take a shower. I left my bedroom light on because I really don't like my room when it's dark. My parents were still awake, so the living room lights were on, and I could see where I was going. When I got out of the shower, I wrapped a towel around myself and turned the bathroom light off without thinking. I forgot my parents usually go to bed around that time, and when they do, they shut off the living room lights. So I stepped into the hallway, and it was pitch black. I turned to my right and opened my bedroom door. My light was off. So was my TV. But I know I left them both on. I had left my TV on purpose because I didn't want my room to be dark. I went inside, shut my door, locked it, and turned my light back on. I got dressed for bed, and then it really hit me. Someone, or something, had turned off both my light and my TV. My brother didn't do it. He was asleep. I asked my mom, and she said she didn't. My stepdad never goes into my room. My little sister was in bed, and she's only 2. I barely slept after that. I called my best friend at 1 in the morning and stayed on the phone until around 2 when she had to sleep. I tried to sleep too, but I couldn't. At one point, I checked the time, and it was 4:11 in the morning. I was exhausted. I finally fell asleep and woke up around 10 because my brother woke me up. Now I'm starting to dread nighttime. I hate admitting that, but I'm scared. I've seen shadow figures before, and lately I can't shake the feeling that one of them is near me. I know Vesper has been around, but I don't think Vesper is what I'm most afraid of. This feels like something else, something heavier. My stepdad even found scratches on himself after saying he didn't care if whatever was here didn't like him. I don't know what to do. I can't tell if I'm just paranoid or if something is really happening. But I feel watched constantly, all the time, especially in my room. There's this strange feeling in my gut that won't go away. I just want to know what this is because not knowing is making everything worse. Lately, I've been staying up until 2 in the morning and waking up early, sometimes around 6. I dream every night, and the dreams are always strange. I even had one where I moved into a house with 2 roommates I didn't know, and that house was haunted too. I've put salt in my room before, and it seemed to help for a while, at least until my room got vacuumed. But even now, I can feel it. That feeling of being stared at. I never feel fully alone, and I never really feel at peace. This happened just a couple of nights ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. I want to say this up front. I was completely sober. I hadn't been drinking, I don't use anything, and I wasn't exhausted or half asleep either. I was switching over to night shifts, so I was intentionally staying up through the night to keep my sleep schedule from getting wrecked. It was around 12:45 in the morning. I was sitting on the couch with my headphones on, listening to music, when I noticed something out of the corner of my right eye. I turned my head and saw this vague shape near the side of the room. It was pale beige and silvery gray, sort of blocky, almost person-shaped. But only for a split second. I blinked, maybe twice, and it was gone. The strange part was the feeling that came with it. It wasn't terrifying, it didn't feel evil or anything like that. But it also didn't feel welcoming. It felt more like disappointment, almost like I had missed something I was supposed to notice sooner. I tried not to overthink it. I told myself it was probably just my eyes playing tricks on me, and I went back to the music. Maybe 20 minutes later, one of our dogs, Milo, woke up. He had been sleeping on the couch across from me. He came over and started barking right beside me, which wasn't too strange by itself. Sometimes he wants to go outside at weird hours if he sees that one of us is still awake. So I got up, thinking I'd let him out. But instead of heading toward the door, Milo walked straight toward the exact spot where I had seen that weird shape. Then he stopped, turned, and looked at me. I called him back and told him to come on, but he just stared at me like he wanted me to follow him. I got irritated and told him to knock it off. Then, just like that, he went back to the couch, curled up, and fell asleep almost immediately. It was odd, but I let it go. A little after 3 in the morning, I got really thirsty. I took my headphones off and went upstairs to get some water. As I got near the kitchen, I heard a noise. When I walked in, our other dog Baxter came out from near the counters. Now, Baxter has a habit of sneaking into the kitchen and trying to lick plates or sniff around for food. So at first, I figured that was all he was doing. He's not supposed to be in there at night, so I shooed him toward the bedroom, where my wife was sleeping. Then I heard the cat meowing. We have a cat who usually stays in the kitchen at night, and she always meows when someone comes in, so that part wasn't unusual. But this meow sounded wrong. It was coming from low to the floor, and it had this frightened little edge to it. I looked down and saw her lying on a towel. Her eyes were huge, completely panicked. When I moved closer, she started growling. At first, I thought maybe the dog had startled her. I spoke gently to her, tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't move. I nudged her softly near her back end, just enough to see if she could get up. She took a few shaky steps and stopped. That's when I saw a puncture wound near her back thigh. I woke my wife and she checked her over more carefully. She found another puncture wound on the other side. From what we could tell, Baxter had bitten her, and I had walked in right before things could get worse. She's still sore and not moving her back legs much, but she does seem to be improving. The part that really bothers me is how out of character it was. We've had Baxter for over a year, and the cat has been with us even longer. He follows her around sometimes, sure, but he has never tried to hurt her. He even sleeps near our other cat without any issue. Milo, the dog who had been downstairs with me, has absolutely no interest in cats at all. So it wasn't just strange, it was completely abnormal. By the time we got the cat settled and everything calmed down, it was close to 4 in the morning. I went back downstairs, but I couldn't focus on the music anymore. I just kept thinking about the cat, the shape I had seen, and Milo staring toward that spot. Eventually, around 5:30, I went to bed. That's when I had this strange early sleep dream. I was standing in front of a mirror. There was nothing around it, no room, no background, no real light source, but I could see the reflection perfectly. And in the mirror, I saw myself, but younger, healthier, better looking, honestly. The image was unbelievably clear. I remember saying, "Yeah, that's me," and I reached out to touch the reflection. Right before my fingers made contact, I jolted awake so hard it felt like my whole body snapped back into place. After that, I just lay there, wide awake. I tried to fall back asleep, but it took hours. If it had only been one strange thing, I'd probably brush it off. Even 2 things, maybe. But 4 separate things happening in the same stretch of night feels harder to ignore. The shape in the room, Milo reacting to that exact spot, Baxter suddenly attacking the cat completely out of character, then that vivid mirror dream. I don't know whether it was coincidence, stress, something paranormal, or just a weird chain of events that my brain is trying to connect. But I can't shake the feeling that something passed through my house that night, and for whatever reason, I noticed just enough of it to be left wondering. I live out in a rural part of Eastern Europe, one of those places where every village feels like it was scattered by hand across the fields. You get a few houses, a church tower, maybe a little shop, and then nothing but dark roads, farmland, and silence until the next town. And lately, I've started to wonder if something strange is moving around out here. I work for a company not far from home. I'm not going to name it because that part doesn't really matter. What matters is that I usually work the late shift, from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night. During those shifts, I've gotten into the habit of walking to the nearest village shop when the food at work doesn't look good, or when I just need a little break from staring at the same office walls. It's not a long walk, but in winter, it means crossing a stretch of road after dark. My workplace sits right on the edge of town. There's a lamp at the entrance gate, and then another one near the first houses in the village. But between them, there's this strip of road, maybe 250 meters, with no lights at all. Just road, ditch, mud, and open field. On cloudy nights, it gets so dark there that the world seems to fold itself shut. I never used to mind it. I'm not someone who scares easily in the dark, and the animals around here are usually harmless. Deer, foxes, the occasional wild boar, but nothing that normally comes looking for trouble. Honestly, I used to enjoy that little walk. The cold air, the quiet, the way the road disappeared ahead of me. It felt peaceful in a lonely sort of way. That changed in February. I had left work like usual, heading toward the shop. The sky was completely overcast, so there wasn't even moonlight to help me. I could barely see where the asphalt ended. I had to keep checking my footing by the feel of mud under one shoe. About halfway through that dark stretch, I heard hooves. Not far away either. They were right beside me, matching my pace from somewhere in the field. At first, I told myself it had to be a deer, maybe a boar, something ordinary. But the sound was too steady, too close, and animals here usually move away from people, not alongside them. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made myself loud. I stomped harder, coughed, scraped my shoes against the road, hoping whatever it was would get spooked and leave. For a few seconds, the hooves kept following me. Then, just before I reached the next lamp, the sound faded off into the field. I never saw what made it. That was unsettling, but I could still explain it away. Animals behave strangely sometimes. Maybe it was confused. Maybe the darkness made it seem closer than it was. But on the way back, it happened again. This time, I was walking on the opposite side of the road, carrying my snacks, trying not to think too much about what I'd heard earlier. Then those same hoofbeats started up again, now on my left. Same rhythm, same distance, just out of sight. I stomped again, louder this time. And then it spoke. At least, I think it spoke. It sounded like a man's voice right beside me in the black field, repeating one nonsense word over and over. I couldn't make out what it was. It wasn't a language I recognized. It rose and fell in pitch, almost playful at moments, then flat and low, then high again. The hoofbeats kept going underneath it. That was when every calm, rational thought in my head packed its little suitcase and left. I ran. I didn't look back. I just sprinted for the company gate, straight toward the light. By the time I reached it and turned around, there was nothing there. No person, no animal, no movement in the field. Just darkness. For months, I convinced myself it had to have been someone messing with me. That's the cleanest explanation, isn't it? A person hiding in a field, making hoof sounds and talking nonsense. But the more I think about it, the less sense that makes. It was freezing, empty, and completely dark. There was no reason for anyone to be standing out there, waiting for me specifically. Still, I stopped walking that road after sunset. Then something else happened this week. A coworker, Merrick, dropped me off near my house after a late shift. From there, I have to walk a little dirt path to reach my gate. It was a bright night, the kind where the sky glows enough that rooftops cut sharp black shapes against it. As I walked, I noticed one of the houses nearby had an unusually tall chimney. I mean really tall. Too tall. It rose way above the roofline, thin and dark against the sky. I actually stopped for a second because I didn't remember any of my neighbors having a chimney like that. But I was tired, so I told myself I'd just never noticed it before. The next night, I came home the same way. The sky was just as bright, and I looked at that same roof again. There was no chimney. Not a short one, not a broken one, nothing in that spot at all. Just the clean slope of the roof against the night sky. So now I don't know what to think. Maybe there's a rational explanation for both things. Maybe the hoofbeats were an animal, and the voice was some weird echo from the road. Maybe the chimney was a branch, or a shadow, or my tired brain stitching shapes together in the dark. I'd really like to believe that. But out here, when the fields go quiet and the roads lose their edges, it's hard not to feel like something is walking just beyond the light, keeping pace. I had the strangest dream, and it felt so vivid that I'm still carrying pieces of it around with me. In the dream, I woke up, or at least I became aware, at what looked like an old filming location. I don't know what it was supposed to be for. A movie? A show? Something abandoned, maybe. The only way in was across this narrow covered bridge, just one lane wide, with a faded red exterior. Past the bridge, there was a gravel road. It was daytime, quiet. Nothing felt wrong yet. But after I crossed over, I saw a group of kids walking back toward the bridge, maybe around early high school age. They looked like they were leaving. When they got close to me, though, they didn't say anything. They just turned off into the tall grass beside the road and kept walking until I couldn't see them anymore. Then they were gone. Not in the usual dream way where something disappears because the scene changes. They disappeared because they went out of sight, and somehow that felt much worse. It felt deliberate. I was still standing there trying to make sense of it when a man I'd never seen before walked up beside me and said, very calmly, "No, they're all right." And then, just like that, I was inside a house. Now it was nighttime. The same kids were there too, sitting around this big room. It might have been a living room, or maybe a study. There was furniture, but no beds. The strange part was that they were talking to me like they knew me, even though I had no idea who any of them were. The man from outside wasn't there anymore. And I need to explain something about him, because this is one of the parts that really unsettled me. In my dreams, if I meet someone I don't actually know, their face is usually vague, blurry. Sometimes I can't remember anything about them afterward. But this man had a face, a clear one. I could still describe him now. If I could draw, I think I could sketch him. Anyway, we were all in this room, and then the temperature dropped. Not just a little. It became deeply cold, like the whole house had suddenly exhaled winter. Then there was this pressure. It wasn't exactly a sound, but it felt like one. almost like when your ears pop while driving up or down a mountain, except I could feel it through my whole body. Then, black smoke started seeping out from under the furniture. At first, it came slowly, thin little strands curling across the floor. Then it thickened. The room got colder. I started hearing voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. And then the scene shifted. We were in another house, going through the same thing again. This time, the smoke came from a closet door right beside us. I tried to hold the door shut, but whatever was behind it forced it open. Everyone ran. I tried to get out too, but there didn't seem to be an exit anywhere. No front door, no back door, nothing that made sense. So I panicked and hid behind a door in one of the rooms, which, looking back, was about as useful as hiding from the ocean behind a paper plate. The smoke came into the room. Then that same man from before stepped out of it, or at least I think he did. I couldn't see everything from where I was crouched behind the door, but he came around into view, looked straight at me, and said, "Well, that wasn't very clever, was it?" Then he grabbed my arm. It hurt. Not like a normal grab. It felt sharp, almost like little knives digging into my skin. And suddenly, we were outside again. Daylight. There were buses parked nearby, and a crowd of random people milling around like we were at some kind of tour stop. Then the same kids walked toward one of the buses, but the second they reached the doors, they vanished. The man looked at me and said, "You really shouldn't come back here." Then I woke up with my heart pounding. The strangest part is that my left forearm still hurt. I was wrapped up in a comforter and the rest of me was overheated, but that spot on my arm felt cold and stinging, exactly where he had grabbed me in the dream. That's why I can't quite shake it. Maybe it was just a weird dream. Maybe my brain put together smoke, old houses, a red bridge, and some stranger with a face too clear to forget. But between how real it felt, the kids vanishing the same way twice, the black smoke, the man warning me not to come back, and that leftover pain in my arm after I woke up, I don't know. It felt like something more than a dream. About 13 years ago, when I was 14, my family and I were living in this old house in Mount Clemens, Michigan. The first thing that happened was actually something my stepmom heard. She was home alone with my little sister, who was 4 at the time, and my sister was asleep upstairs. Out of nowhere, my stepmom heard a baby crying. Not just a little sound either. She was sure it was coming from upstairs. But there was no baby in the house. After that, things just kept happening. Over the 10 years we lived there, pretty much everyone in the family saw her at least once. A woman in white with long black hair. She usually showed up in the master bedroom upstairs, or right at the top of the stairs. And from the living room couch, you could see that spot clearly. So sometimes you would just be sitting there, watching TV or talking, and there she'd be. The strange part is, back then, she never felt evil. I know that sounds odd, but it's true. None of us felt threatened. It was more like we all understood she was there, the same way you know the weather has changed before you look outside. She was just part of the house. Then about 5 years ago, I moved out with my girlfriend at the time. My family stayed in that house for a few more years after I left. And somehow, she came with me. At first, it felt the same. I would sense her around. Sometimes I'd see her. Still, nothing about it felt dangerous, just familiar. But then she started showing up in my dreams. In the beginning, even that wasn't bad. She would just be there, somewhere in the dream, not doing anything. But over time, something changed. The feeling around her became different, heavier, wrong. Instead of just appearing, she started following me, and it felt like she wanted me to be afraid. About a year ago, I had the first dream that really shook me. In the dream, I was at some kind of haunted attraction, like a scare park, with a few friends. One of them, Elias, had actually seen the woman in real life before, back at the old house. He was so unsettled by it that he refused to ever stay there again. In the dream, we were walking around, trying to decide what to do, when Elias nudged me and said, "She's watching you. She's following us." I remember telling him, "Just ignore her. Keep walking." But she kept getting closer. Then I had this stupid thought. I thought, this time I'm going to scare her before she scares me. I know, bad idea. She stopped following us, and I told Elias, "Now's my chance." I tried to sneak up on her. I ran toward her, reaching out like I was going to grab her. But right before my hands touched her, she turned around faster than anything I've ever seen. She had the worst smile on her face. Not a normal smile, not human, just this awful, knowing grin. Then she grabbed me. She lifted me straight up into the air while staring into my eyes, still smiling. It felt like I was falling upward, like the sky had turned into a trap door. I woke up screaming and gasping for air. After that, everything seemed to stop for a while. I didn't see her. I didn't feel her. I honestly thought maybe I was finally free of it. Until 2 nights ago. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment out in the country now with my girlfriend and her kids. That night was really warm, and I was having a hard time falling asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, my girlfriend woke up because she heard what sounded like a baby crying. But she said it didn't sound like a normal cry. She said it sounded like a baby in pain, like something terrible was happening to it. Her kids are all older, so there's no way it was them. Still, she got up and ran into their room to check on them. They were all asleep. But while she was standing there in their room, she could still hear the crying. She said it sounded like it was right there with her. Then she came back into our room to tell me the kids were okay. And this is the part that bothers me. She said I smiled at her, rolled over, and went back to sleep. I have no memory of that. None. I've tried to remember it. I've gone over it again and again. She even told me what was on the TV at the time, little details that should have helped jog something loose in my head. But there's nothing there. That same night, within about an hour of her hearing the baby, the woman came back in my dream. I don't remember most of the dream, but I remember the ending perfectly. I was getting into my car. I jumped into the driver's seat, and when I looked into the driver's side mirror to back up, she was there, in the mirror, looking straight at me. Same black hair, same white clothes, same awful smile. And for some reason, I reached out for her again. The second I did, I started choking. I couldn't breathe at all. It felt like hands were around my throat, or like I'd been held underwater too long. Then I woke up gasping so loudly that I woke my girlfriend. I spent the next morning trying to look into it, trying to find anything that might explain what's been happening. But I keep coming up short. I don't feel like I'm losing my mind. That's the hard part. Other people have seen her. People who had no reason to lie. People who still believe, firmly, that what they saw in that house was real. What I can't understand is why she stayed with me. Why, after all these years, did she follow me? And why does it feel like whatever she wants from me has changed? I think this all started when I was around 11. I found this old mirror at a church rummage sale. It was free, and at that age, free felt exciting. I brought it home and hung it on my bedroom closet door, not thinking anything of it. But almost right away, my sleep changed. I started having sleep paralysis, Then the nightmares came. It was always this woman in white. She looked ruined somehow, like her body had been torn open, and I could see things hanging from her stomach. I know how awful that sounds, but that's what I saw. And I was so young. I didn't have the words for it. I just knew I was terrified. I got to the point where I wouldn't sleep alone. I either slept in my parents' room, or I begged someone to stay in my room with me. The only person who seemed to believe me was my grandfather, Martin, who was living with us then. He had a drinking problem, so when he said he believed me, it didn't exactly make me feel safer. It just made everything feel stranger. While we were in that apartment, my mom and I both heard things. Banging, scratching, whispering from places where nobody was standing. But my mom was struggling with addiction at the time, so even though she heard it too, I still felt like no one would take us seriously. Around then, I also messed with a Ouija board once. Nothing dramatic happened that I can remember, but I've always wondered if that mattered somehow. I started sleepwalking too. Not just wandering around my room either. I would try to walk toward the stairs outside our apartment. It happened so often that my parents put a baby gate in my doorway and another one near the kitchen, just to keep me from getting out while I was asleep. My dad worked away from home a lot, usually gone for several days at a time, so most of this was just me and my mom trying to pretend things were normal. Eventually, we moved far away, to another state. We stayed with my aunt, her husband, my cousin, and my grandfather. Nothing huge happened there, except for more sleep paralysis now and then. For a while, I thought maybe whatever it was had stayed behind. Then we moved into the apartment we're in now, and for a while things were calm. But then, my mom brought her old childhood dresser out of storage. She told me that when she was younger and had that dresser in her room, she used to see this tall, dark, threatening male figure near it. She described it like a shadow with a presence, heavy, angry, watching. I didn't believe her, not really. I used the dresser for a while, and nothing happened at first. Then we went away on vacation for about a week. When we came back, the heads had been broken off our Mother Mary statues outside. There were also fresh white flowers left near them. We tried to explain it away. Maybe a neighbor had knocked them over and felt bad. Maybe the flowers were an apology. We buried the broken statue in the backyard and placed the flowers over it. A couple weeks later, during quarantine, I got bored and decided to sand and repaint the dresser. Less than a week after that, I had a cross hanging from one of the handles, and it flew off so hard that it hit my wall and knocked a painting down. That's when I started feeling like maybe my mom had been telling the truth. Another weird thing happened around that time. We had a roommate then, and one evening my mom and I both saw him walk downstairs and go out the front door. A few minutes later, we called him to ask what he wanted for dinner, and he came out of his bedroom, confused, like he had never left at all. We both saw him leave, both of us. After that, it became smaller things, but still unsettling. Bruises I couldn't explain, scratches, the occasional burn. Nothing life-threatening, but enough that I couldn't ignore it. Then my mom passed away from a drug overdose in late 2021, right when I was starting my freshman year of high school. After that, I was destroyed. I was depressed in a way I still don't fully know how to explain. I've heard people say dark things feed off negative energy, and if that's true, then I must have looked like a feast. I got rid of the dresser because it reminded me too much of my mom. But after that, I became terrified of my closet. It would open on its own, so I started putting things in front of it. I had nightmares about it. Sleep paralysis too. I'd hear scratching from inside, and sometimes the doorknob would rattle. For a while, I couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. Now I use the closet again, and thankfully nothing has happened with it lately. A few months ago, a friend of mine cleansed my room. He's sensitive to that kind of thing, and he had told me before that he wouldn't sleep over because there was something dark in my house. After he cleansed it, things did feel lighter for a while, but this morning, I woke up with a burn on the inside of my arm. It was bad enough to blister. That scared me all over again. I'm usually home with my little brother and my dog, and I don't know what I'd do if something happened to them. My boyfriend stays over sometimes, and he's never experienced anything, which almost makes me feel even more alone in it. I don't know what this is. I don't even fully believe I'm asking for help like this, but I don't know what else to do anymore. Moving didn't stop it. Cleansing helped, but only for a little while. The only person who really experienced any of this with me was my mom, and she's gone now. Most people don't believe me. Sometimes I barely believe myself. I just know I'm scared, and I don't want to feel alone with it anymore. I've got an 18-month-old little boy, and even though he has his own bedroom, we don't actually sleep in there right now. His bed is a little too high for my comfort, and I'm always worried that if he wakes up before I do, he might try to climb down and hurt himself. Our other spare room is being used as an office, so there isn't really another bed option. And since I'm still breastfeeding, and he usually wakes up at least once during the night, it's honestly just easier for us to sleep near each other. So I've made the living room into kind of a safe little sleep setup for us. He has his play area gated off with a playpen, and I put a mattress on the floor with pillows around it, just in case he wakes before me. That way I know he's safe. My husband works very early in the morning, so he sleeps in the main bedroom. Our 3 dogs usually sleep in there with him, right on the bed, just like they did before our son was born. We didn't want to change their whole routine too much after the baby came. I should also mention that our dogs are big, and I'm very firm about not leaving kids and dogs alone together before a certain age. So because of that, we all kind of sleep in separate areas of the house. The dogs can still roam around if they want to. Sometimes they'll rest in the dining area, sometimes by the entrance, sometimes in the hallway. It just depends on what they feel like doing. So that's the layout. A few nights ago, everyone was settled in their usual spots. My son was asleep beside me, my husband was in the bedroom, and the dogs were with him. I was still awake, doing some homework on my tablet. I didn't have any lights on because I didn't want to wake my son. Then, out of nowhere, the hallway light turned on. It was the hallway that leads toward the main bedroom, so my first thought was that it had to be my husband. That was the only thing that made sense. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. So I got up to check, wondering why he was awake at 2 or 3 in the morning. But when I looked into the bedroom, my husband was completely asleep. The dogs were asleep too. All of them were out cold. Nobody was up. I turned the hallway light off and went back to the living room. I checked on my son, who was still sleeping peacefully right next to me, and I just tried to shrug it off. I didn't want to think too hard about it. But then tonight, just a little while ago, it happened again. I was getting ready to rest and putting on some soft classical music on my tablet. That's when I noticed that the light in my son's bedroom was suddenly on. And I know for a fact I had turned every light off before putting him to bed. I always do. He cannot sleep if there's even the tiniest bit of light in the room. So when I saw that glow coming from his room, I felt my stomach drop a little. I went to check, thinking maybe my husband had gone in there, or maybe one of the dogs had somehow gotten through, but no one was in the room. The baby gates were all still where they should be, and the light was coming from this standing lamp in his room. The weirdest part is that the lamp hasn't even worked in weeks. We don't have smart bulbs or anything fancy. They're just regular lights. And no, our dogs don't know how to turn on lamps. I also would have heard their nails clicking on the tile if they had walked through the house. What really unsettled me is that the dogs didn't react at all. No barking, no getting up, not even a little flinch. They just kept resting like nothing happened. I know this might sound silly, and maybe I'm just scaring myself. Before my son was born, I used to watch a lot of horror movies, listen to creepy podcasts, and I even collected horror-themed stuff. After he was born, I just kind of stepped away from all of that without really meaning to. Lately, though, I've been watching Evil on Netflix, so part of me wonders if my brain is just turning every little thing into something spooky. But the lights turning on by themselves? That part is hard for me to explain. And it's not the only odd thing. There have been nights where I swear I hear someone calling for me, but when I look around, no one is there. At first, I told myself it was probably just like those phantom baby cries you hear when you have a newborn. Then earlier today, I was on FaceTime with my mom. It was just me and my son in the room, and the dogs were asleep. My husband wasn't there. But my mom suddenly said she clearly heard my husband's voice say something to me. Except he wasn't anywhere near us. The strange things almost always seem to happen near the entrance of the house. When you walk in, my son's room is on the right, the office and guest bathroom are on the left, and the hallway goes straight back toward the main bedroom. I keep trying to explain it away. But these lights keep turning on. And honestly, it's starting to make me feel like something in this house is trying to get my attention. I've spent a lot of nights outdoors over the years, and a good number of them were solo. I've camped alone in all kinds of places without ever really feeling shaken. So when this happened, it stood out in a way I still can't fully explain. This was up in Little Cottonwood Canyon, near Secret Lake. Beautiful place, really beautiful. The kind of place you'd normally expect to feel peaceful the second you get there. But for me, and later for my sister and a few friends too, that area carried this strange feeling that I've never felt anywhere else. It started one evening when I got a text from some friends saying they were heading up to Secret Lake. I'd never been there before, but I figured I'd meet them up there. I was delayed a bit at home, so they got a head start and I drove up after them. I parked lower down than I should have, though I didn't realize that at the time, so I ended up adding extra distance to the hike. When I started out, there were still a few people on the trail, but before long, it was just me. The sun was dropping fast, and I kept thinking, it's fine, I hike fast, I'll catch them. I was texting my sister for updates, but service was spotty. A message would come through here and there. She told me they were almost at the lake, so I picked up my pace. Then I started jogging. Then really jogging, because all of a sudden I realized how low the light was getting. At the same time, my phone battery started draining way faster than I expected. It dropped from around 30% to the teens in what felt like no time. I'd been listening to something on my phone while hiking, so I shut everything off to save what was left. And that was right around when the feeling started. At first it was subtle, just this heavy sense of being alone. But not regular alone. I've been alone on trails plenty of times. This was different. It felt bigger than that. It felt like I wasn't just alone on the mountain. It felt like I was alone in the entire world. That sounds dramatic, I know. But that's honestly the closest way I can describe it. The higher I got, the stronger it became. It was like the whole world had emptied out. No people, no animals, no life anywhere. Just me, on this mountain, in some strange, silent version of Earth. And the wind made it worse. It wasn't even particularly strong, but it felt wrong somehow. Not like weather. More like a message. Like the wind itself was reminding me that everything around me was empty. I remember pulling out my phone to text my sister again and seeing that it had died. That hit me harder than it normally would have. It was getting colder too, and I was underdressed. Just a t-shirt, no real layers for what the temperature was becoming. The evening light had turned that deep blue color where you suddenly realize you're losing visibility fast. I pressed the power button one more time, almost out of habit, and somehow the phone flickered back on. It had maybe 1 or 2% left. I called my sister. It rang and rang, but she didn't answer. Then I saw she had sent me a picture. It was a photo of one of my friends, I'll call him Mason, sitting on a rock overlooking the canyon, smiling. Totally ordinary picture. But looking at it in that moment gave me the strangest feeling. It felt impossibly far away, like it hadn't been taken on that same mountain an hour earlier, but somewhere completely unreachable, like it had come from another world. So I started running harder, staring at that picture, trying to memorize the rocks and the angle and the background so I could find them. When I finally reached the lake, the sun had already dropped behind the mountains. The stars were starting to show in the water, and I was scanning the whole shoreline for them. No one was there. That was the point where the feeling got overwhelming. I started calling out for my sister and my friends. No answer. Then I started yelling, really yelling, running around the lake, calling their names over and over. Nothing came back. No voices, no movement, nothing. At that point, I bailed. I just turned and ran back down the trail, trying to make it to my car before it went fully dark. My phone was dead for good by then, so I had no light. Eventually, it got black enough that I had to slow down and feel each step so I wouldn't roll an ankle. Then, about halfway down, I found them. They were fine. Totally fine. Relief hit me immediately, but that feeling didn't leave with the relief. It stayed with me. A few months later, that same group decided to camp, and I picked that area again because it was familiar and easy for everyone. The second we got near the lake, that same feeling dropped onto me all over again. And this time, I wasn't alone. I was with people I trusted, laughing, setting up camp, doing normal camping stuff, and still, it felt like I was the only person alive. That was what made it even stranger. I also started feeling kind of sick, just generally off. The wind that night wasn't anything special. Most people would have called it calm. Just a light breeze brushing against the tent. But every tiny movement of the tent fabric made me feel this deep dread. It's hard to explain. It felt like the emptiness was pressing in through the wind itself. The next morning, my sister told me she'd felt it too. She said from the moment we got there, she felt this horrible anxiety and this strange, soul-deep isolation, like all warmth and all human closeness had been stripped away. Later, when I asked her about it again, she described it in a way that stuck with me. She basically said that when you're scared or sick or even miserable, you can usually still picture comfort somewhere. Home, childhood, other people, even strangers. But this was different. This felt like there was no somewhere else. Just you. And that was exactly it. She went on to describe how even though the place overlooked a resort and cabins and signs of civilization, it still felt emotionally and psychologically far away from all of it. Not physically remote, just removed. As if the hill where we camped was cut off from everything warm and human. She talked about the cold too. Not just normal cold, but this strange kind that didn't seem to match her gear or the actual temperature. She had good equipment, enough layers, a solid sleeping bag, all of that. But none of it seemed to touch the feeling. She said she lay there awake in the dark with the wind outside, and all she could think about was the warmth of humanity itself. Cities, homes, lamps glowing in windows, people going about ordinary life. Not in some poetic way, but in a very real, almost desperate way. Like she was aching for proof that people existed. That really got to me, because it matched what I had felt almost exactly. She said what scared her most wasn't the dark itself, or the mountain, or even the isolation in a normal sense. It was the absence of that basic human feeling we all carry around without noticing. That sense that somewhere, people are near, life is happening, warmth exists. Up there, she said, it felt violently gone. And honestly, that's about as close as I can get to describing it too. Even later, when we looked back at photos from that trip, something about them felt off. Not fake, not supernatural exactly, just distant. Still, lifeless in a way the place shouldn't have felt. Especially considering how many people were actually nearby, and whatever that feeling was up there, it felt like the complete absence of it. I still don't know what to call that experience. I don't know if it was psychological, environmental, something about altitude, the timing, the cold, the wind, or just one of those rare places that hits your brain in the wrong way. But I know I wasn't the only one who felt it, and I know I've never felt anything else quite like it before or since. I was about 11 when I saw something I still can't explain, and honestly, I've never forgotten it. At the time, I'd been living for maybe close to a year in this quiet little coastal town, tucked between steep hills and the ocean. It was the kind of place that felt peaceful almost all the time, especially in the early evening. One night, just before sunset, I was heading out to walk to the corner bakery. Our street was a dead end, really small, with only a handful of houses on it, and an empty patch of land right across from our gate. The moment I stepped outside and closed the gate behind me, I stopped cold. There, moving slowly across that empty lot, was this glowing white ball of light. It was about the size of a small orange, maybe a little bigger than a tennis ball. And what struck me right away was how smoothly it moved. It wasn't wobbling, flickering, or darting around like a bug or a flashlight beam. It just floated. Calmly, deliberately, like it knew exactly where it was going. I stood there completely still, just staring. The light drifted upward until it was maybe 8 or 10 feet off the ground, close to the level of the power lines, and then it glided out from the lot and toward the entrance of the street. When it got there, it turned around and traced almost the exact same path back again. Then it slipped into the empty lot and disappeared. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt strangely clear, like every second of it stamped itself into my memory. And the oddest part is, I wasn't scared. Not at all. I remember just standing there thinking, what on earth is that? That was it. No panic. No urge to run. Just pure confusion and awe. I knew it wasn't a firefly, and it definitely wasn't anything ordinary. The way it moved felt too controlled, too intentional. Even as a kid, I could tell I was looking at something I'd never seen before. Now I'm in my 30s, and I can still picture it perfectly. The soft white glow, the size of it, the way it floated through the air so quietly and so precisely. Time has not blurred that memory at all. And to this day, I still have no idea what I saw that evening. So I'm Myra, and I grew up in a 2-story terrace house with my family. We've lived there for years, and for almost as long as I can remember, strange things have been happening around us. The first thing started when I was still pretty young, sometime in the early 2010s. Because our houses are built so close together, it's normal to hear noise from the neighbors now and then. But the house on our right was different. It had been empty for ages. The front patch was overgrown, the gate always looked untouched, and the whole place felt abandoned. Then, every so often, usually around dusk, we'd hear it. Just one marble. It would sound like a single marble hitting the floor and bouncing over and over again. Not every day, but often enough that it stayed with you. At first, I brushed it off. I thought maybe something was falling over next door, or maybe I was imagining it. But after a while, everyone in my family noticed it too. We never really sat down and talked about it properly, though. It was more like one of those things we all heard, but no one wanted to be the first to say out loud. I remember one time, when I still didn't really understand how unsettling it was, I grabbed a marble from my toy box and sat near the wall we shared with that house. When the sound from next door stopped, I bounced my own marble back against the floor, almost like I was answering it. And I still remember what happened next. The marble sound from the other side suddenly came back louder, faster, harder, like it was reacting to me. At the time, I laughed. I was a kid. I thought it was funny. But that sound stayed with us for years. It went on for nearly a decade. The only time it ever stopped was when someone finally bought the empty house and moved in. For a while, everything was quiet. Then a few years later, the house was abandoned again, and the marble came back. Only this time, it got worse. It was no longer just coming from the empty house beside us. Sometimes my family would hear it from upstairs, sometimes from the ceiling. Sometimes it would happen when only one person was alone in a room, like it wanted to be noticed. I spend most of my time away now because I stay in my college dorm, but every now and then I'd get a call from home, and one of my siblings or my parents would bring it up again, frustrated and shaken, like, "It happened last night," or "We heard it again." But the most frightening experience happened recently. It was late on a Saturday night. My sister Maris was in her bedroom just scrolling on her phone, minding her own business. Then she heard the sound again. Not from outside, not from the ceiling, not from somewhere far off in the house, right in front of her bedroom door. She said it sounded exactly like someone had dropped a single marble onto the floor just outside and let it bounce there. She froze. Then she rushed to lock her door and turned all her lights on. She stayed like that until the sound finally stopped. The next morning, all of us ended up talking about it. And that was when it got even worse, because everyone had heard it too. My parents heard it outside their room. My brother said he heard it outside his door. Even though their rooms are spaced apart across the hallway, they all said the same thing. It sounded like the marble was right there, directly in front of them, loud and clear, as if someone had thrown it down just outside each door. We still haven't done anything about it. I guess, in a strange way, we've made an unspoken agreement with whatever it is. As long as it doesn't show itself, and as long as it doesn't actually hurt anyone, we just keep living with it. We stay quiet. We pretend we can handle it. Because when you hear a single marble bounce in an empty place where no one should be, over and over again for years, eventually, you start to wonder whether something in that house has been listening the whole time. I should probably start by saying this up front. I know how this sounds. If someone else told me this story, I'd probably try to explain it away too. Stress, grief, anxiety, lack of sleep, all of that makes sense. And honestly, part of me still wants to believe that's all this is. But what makes it hard to dismiss is that strange things have followed me for most of my life, long before any of this happened. So, a few years ago, when I was 16, my dad's mother passed away in late winter. I had gone to see her a few days before, and later I was told I was the last person to really talk to her and hold her hand. That stayed with me. It was comforting in one way, but it also hurt, because her own sons, my dad and my uncle, should have been the ones there for her more. I went to the funeral, stood beside her casket, and said goodbye the best I could. For a while, that was that. Sad, but normal. Just grief. Then, about a year later, my mom, my younger brother, and I moved into this old house way out in rural Indiana. From the beginning, I hated it. I couldn't explain why exactly, but it felt too familiar in all the wrong ways, like the house I grew up in, the one where I'd had experiences as a kid that I still can't fully explain. At first, it was subtle. I'd get this constant feeling that something was watching me from the closet or from the doorway. My pets wouldn't come into my room once it got dark, which was weird because they usually followed me everywhere. I'd lie awake half the night for no reason at all, or I'd wake up suddenly like something had jolted me out of sleep. Sometimes, when I was home alone, I'd hear my name, clear as day. I tried to be rational about it. My family was putting a lot of pressure on me about school and my future, and I figured maybe my mind was just under too much strain. It didn't help that I spent way too much time reading creepy stories and watching horror movies. I kept telling myself that was all it was. But it didn't stay small. Whatever that feeling was, it started seeming closer, nearer to my bed, nearer to me. I got so scared of being alone at night that I stopped sleeping in my room and started making a spot for myself on the floor in my mom's room instead. My Aunt Kira suggested we take pictures around the house just to see if anything showed up. In a few of them, there were these little floating lights, probably dust, maybe not, I don't know. But then there was one photo of me sitting on the couch. It was taken right around the anniversary of my grandmother's death. My mom snapped it while I was just sitting there, and when we looked at it later, there was a face in the reflection of the window behind me. Not just any face, it looked so much like my grandmother. Clear enough that all of us just froze. It looked like she was standing behind me, watching me. At the time, that actually comforted me. We all thought maybe it was her checking in, making sure I was okay. She loved me, and that explanation felt gentle. It felt safe. I wanted to believe that. But then last fall, everything started up again. And this time it felt different. I got desperate enough that I asked Aunt Kira to do a pendulum reading for me. I know not everyone believes in that, and I'm not saying you have to. I'm just telling you what happened and what I was told. According to her, whatever this is had attached itself to me back in that house in Indiana years ago. She said it watches me constantly, that it messes with things because it wants my attention. And the part that really got to me was this. She said it isn't my grandmother. Not even close. She said whatever I'm dealing with wants me to know it's there, that it follows me everywhere. And I'm being honest with you, I am deeply, genuinely scared. She gave me a protective stone and told me to pray. I'm not really a religious person, but I was willing to try anything. I put the stone above my pillow one night, and almost immediately, I felt this crushing pressure on my chest. I got sick right after, physically sick, like my whole body was rejecting something. The last big thing happened at work. I was in the stockroom, just doing my job, and I saw it. Not fully, not in a way I could point to and prove, but enough. It was there in the corner, still and watching, like it wanted me to notice it, like it had been waiting for me to look up. And that's where I am now. I honestly can't tell anymore what's real and what's anxiety. Maybe I'm unraveling. Maybe grief and fear have just tangled themselves together so tightly that I can't separate them. Or maybe something really has been with me all this time. I don't know. I just needed to say it out loud, exactly as it happened, because keeping it to myself has been eating at me. And right now, more than anything, I'm just waiting, wondering what it's going to do next. So, I had the strangest moment on the Stockholm subway today, and honestly, I still can't stop replaying it in my head. I'm not here to say it was something paranormal, and I'm not saying it was nothing either. I really don't know what to make of it. I just know it left me with this weird, lingering feeling I can't quite explain. I was sitting on the train with my friend when this older man came over and sat beside us. He looked completely ordinary at first glance. Nicely dressed, very composed, soft-spoken, and sharp. He had this thoughtful, almost lecturer-like presence about him. Nothing chaotic, nothing off. He didn't seem drunk or confused or anything like that. Just calm and very intentional. He started by asking if we were Norwegian. We told him we were actually Finnish, and he smiled, apologized politely, and made a brief comment about Finland. Very normal, very friendly. Then he looked at us and said, "Can I ask you something? Do you think time moves faster inside this train than it does outside?" We kind of looked at each other and said we weren't sure, and then he started explaining relativity. Not in an over-the-top way, just very plainly, like a teacher explaining something he knew well. He said Einstein had shown that time can move differently depending on speed. Then he asked another question. He said, "True or false? Time moves faster at the top of your head than at your feet." My friend guessed true, and the man nodded. He said yes, because of gravity. The way he explained it was so matter-of-fact and confident. He clearly knew physics. At one point, he mentioned Stockholm University and gave the impression that he had spent time studying or working in that world. Then he paused and said, "Last question. If I told you I'm a time traveler, would you believe me?" We laughed a little and said no. And he just said, very calmly, "I am. I've traveled through time." That was the strange part. He didn't say it like he was trying to be funny. He didn't say it dramatically. He just said it so evenly, so casually, like he was telling us where he was from. Then he added, "A time traveler always recognizes another time traveler immediately." My friend asked him how that was even possible, how you'd recognize one. And the man said, "We've only just met, so I won't tell you yet. But when you are an old man, I'll come back and explain it to you." He said that directly to my friend, and something about the way he said it just stayed with me. We all got off at the same station a few minutes later. He didn't linger. He didn't follow us or try to keep the conversation going. He just wished us a good day and walked away at this slow, unbothered pace. And that's what's been sitting with me ever since. It's not even really the words themselves. It was the feeling of it all. He didn't come across as unstable, and he didn't feel like someone putting on a performance. He felt deeply calm, intelligent, and oddly sincere, like someone completely at ease with what he was saying. I know the most rational explanation is probably just that he was an eccentric older academic having a playful conversation. And maybe that's exactly what it was. But I don't know. The whole thing had this eerie, meaningful feeling to it, and I can't seem to shake it. This really happened to me when I was about 9 or 10, and even now, in my 20s, I still think about it all the time. What makes it even stranger is that I still have the same little ball I used to test my vision that day. I remember I was exhausted that afternoon, so I laid down for a nap. Nothing felt unusual at first, but when I woke up, I could tell right away that something was off. I wasn't scared though. I was mostly confused. The world just didn't look the way it normally did. The colors were wrong somehow. I walked out into the living room, and my dad was there, watching TV like usual. I glanced around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and then this very clear thought hit me. I'm seeing the way my dad sees. My dad is colorblind. He's always had trouble telling certain reds and greens apart. And somehow, for that short stretch of time, it felt like I had stepped directly into his version of the world. The clearest memory I have is of this old toy ball I had as a kid. It had bright colored sections on it, red, blue, green, and yellow. I still have it actually. That day, I picked it up and stared at it, trying to figure out what had changed. The blue was still visible, but it looked much darker than usual, almost deep navy, like it had lost all its brightness. The red was there, but only barely. It seemed faded, weak, almost washed out. The green didn't really stand out at all. It just sort of blended in and disappeared. And the yellow was the same way. It was like it had been muted so much that it barely existed. The best way I can explain it is this. It felt like someone had turned down the color in the world, but only for certain shades. Reds were dimmer. Greens and yellows seemed to vanish. Everything looked flatter, quieter. And then there was the light. That part still amazes me when I think about it. Normally, sunlight feels strong to me. Sometimes it's so bright it makes me squint right away. But that day, it didn't bother me at all. I even went outside to check. The sunlight felt strangely soft, almost distant, like it wasn't fully reaching me. The whole world seemed less intense, not just in color, but in brightness too. What's so strange is that I never felt afraid. I was curious more than anything. It felt unusual, obviously, but I was calm the whole time. I think because I was still sleepy, I eventually just laid back down and went to sleep again. A couple of hours later, I woke up and everything was normal. Completely normal. The colors were back. The light felt bright again. It was over just like that. And it has never happened again. Years later, my mom was going through old boxes and saved toys, and I found that same ball. I just stood there holding it, staring at it, remembering that afternoon so clearly. There's something about having that actual object in my hands that makes the memory feel even more real. Like it wasn't just a weird dream or something I imagined. It happened. I've had my own theory about it for a long time. Since my dad is colorblind, I've always wondered if maybe I carry something genetically connected to it, and for whatever reason, my brain sort of slipped into a different mode during that half-asleep, half-awake state. Maybe something misfired for a little while. Maybe my brain processed color differently just for those few hours. I honestly don't know. But what stayed with me most wasn't just how strange it was. It was how meaningful it felt. That's why the memory has never left me. It wasn't just bizarre. It felt personal. Almost like I'd been allowed, briefly, to step into someone else's vision, someone I loved, and come back carrying a piece of it with me. You know, looking back, I think my first truly unexplained experiences started sometime in the mid-1990s and carried on for years. At the time, I was living in this beautiful old Victorian house, well over a century old, and that was where it all began. One night, I woke up to this strange tapping sound. Not loud, but persistent enough to pull me out of sleep. When I opened my eyes, I saw what looked like a man dressed in old-fashioned clothing, older than anything from my own time, really, quietly sweeping the floor with a broom. As he moved, the broom kept knocking against the wall. I just lay there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then there was another moment in that same house that stayed with me. I came downstairs one day and found 2 kitchen knives taken out of the drawer and laid crossed over each other on the counter. I lived alone, and this was long before everything was instantly documented with a phone in your hand. You just had the experience, and then you were left with it. Later, I moved into an even older cottage, nearly 200 years old, and I lived there for about 20 years. That house had a lot going on. For a long stretch, the light bulbs in the sitting room kept blowing every few months. I had the wiring checked, had the fixtures looked at, and everything came back fine. Nothing was wrong. Then, after years of this, it suddenly stopped as mysteriously as it had started, and the problem never came back. In the bedroom, I had these window screens with pull cords, and every so often one of those cords would swing so hard it looked as though someone had yanked it. Then it would stop completely. No draft, no open window, nothing that could explain it. That same room gave me one of the worst scares I've ever had. I heard a loud breath, like someone standing close by and exhaling sharply into the room. It was so clear and so sudden that it made my whole body go cold. There were smaller things too, the kind that sound almost silly until they happen to you. One morning I came downstairs and found my shopping note, which I always kept attached to the fridge with a magnet, placed neatly on the kitchen counter. The magnet was sitting right on top of it, as if someone had carefully set it there. It hadn't just fallen. It couldn't have. And then came the moment that finally pushed me to leave. I woke up around 2 in the morning to a huge crash. A large framed picture that had been hanging securely on the wall for maybe 20 years had come down somehow. But what got me was the way it landed, face up, on the floor, with the glass shattered. That was the point where I thought, no, I'm done. I'm moving. So I did. I moved into a newer house, built in the 1970s, with no tragic history, nothing people would usually point to. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. I thought maybe the activity had been tied to the age of the homes, or whatever energy people believe old places hold on to. But it didn't stop. Not long ago, I was standing in the lounge when the TV switched on by itself. I was startled, of course, but then about 10 minutes later, I walked into the bedroom and that TV turned on too, completely on its own. It felt less like a coincidence and more like something following a pattern I still don't understand. People always say, "Why didn't you film it?" But honestly, when something like that happens, your first reaction isn't to grab your phone. You just freeze. And by the time you think to record it, it's over. The room is quiet again. The moment is gone. That's how it always seems to happen. What's left me thinking the most is this. I used to assume the strange activity was connected to the old houses. That made sense to me. But now I'm in a much newer home, and things are still happening. So I've started to wonder whether it isn't the houses at all. Maybe, somehow, it's connected to me. I'm a very sensitive person. I experience mirror pain synesthesia, so I can physically feel other people's pain in a very real way. And I've always had a high level of emotional sensitivity too. I don't say that dramatically. It's just true. So lately I found myself wondering whether that openness, that sensitivity, has anything to do with these experiences. Whether some people are just more aware of things they can't easily explain. I don't claim to have the answers. I only know what I've seen, heard, and lived through. And after all these years, I'm beginning to feel like whatever this is, it may be less about where I live, and more about me. You know, I've been thinking a lot about the house next to ours lately, and honestly, it's been unsettling in a way I can't quite shake. We live in a semi-detached house, and for years the place next door belonged to a kind Muslim woman named Nabila. She passed away in a car accident about 9 years ago, and it was really heartbreaking at the time because she and my mom were quite close. She was one of those genuinely warm people who always treated our family with kindness, so even now, there's still a certain feeling attached to that house. For a long time, nothing strange ever happened there. The downstairs had been used as a small workshop during the weekdays, with a few women coming in to work, so the house never felt completely abandoned. But the upper floor stayed locked up and empty. Then, not too long ago, Nabila's older sister, who lives in another province, arranged for some repairs to be done. People came in to treat the place for termites, clear out old cabinets and broken furniture, and in the process, parts of the ceiling upstairs were left exposed. Ever since then, things have started to feel different. Over the last couple of weeks, my family and I have been hearing odd noises coming from the second floor of that empty house. Not constantly, just every few nights. It sounds like something being dragged slowly across a wooden floor, or like objects being shifted around. Then one evening, around 7:30, all of us heard a sudden, heavy bang against the wall between our house and theirs. It was loud enough that everyone froze. My mom got worried right away and called the caretaker who lives nearby. He came over, went inside to check the place, and didn't find anyone. The only unusual thing he noticed was that one of the old glass louver windows upstairs had been left partly open, so he shut it before leaving. After that, we tried to be practical about it. We told ourselves it was probably just the wind, or maybe something disturbed during the repairs. Since the noises had only happened a few times, we thought it was better not to dwell on it. But then last night, it happened again, and this time it felt impossible to ignore. It was around 10 p.m. I was in my room scrolling on my phone, just relaxing, when I suddenly heard that same sound again from the other side of the wall. Something was moving upstairs. Not just a random creak either. It really sounded like an object being pulled or shifted, and then almost like someone rummaging through a drawer. What made it worse was this: there were no footsteps at all. That's the part that keeps bothering me. In these houses, when someone walks around on the upper floor next door, we can usually hear it clearly because the structures are connected. But this time, there was movement. There was the sound of searching or dragging, and yet not a single step. And where I live, in a big city with cameras all over the streets and outside most homes, it's hard to imagine someone sneaking in and out unnoticed, especially repeatedly. These sounds never happen during the day, only at night, and by now this has been the 4th time in about 2 weeks. Maybe there's a simple explanation. I still want to believe there is. But I can't deny that every time the house goes quiet again, the whole thing feels heavier somehow, like it's holding on to something it doesn't want to let go of. So, I teach high school, and every now and then I end up staying late to finish grading papers. The teacher's workroom is tucked at the very end of this long hallway, and once it gets past 6 in the evening, that whole part of the building just empties out completely. Usually the security officer is across campus near the auditorium, so for the most part, it's just me there by myself. A few nights ago, I was still in the office around 8:30, going through a stack of essays. Everything was really still. The only sounds were the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above me and my pen moving across the page. Then, I heard footsteps out in the hallway. Not fast, not frantic, just steady, unhurried walking. The kind of sound that makes you think someone's simply passing by on their way somewhere else. At first, I figured it had to be the security officer, so I didn't pay much attention. But then, I noticed something that felt off. I didn't hear his keys, and he almost always pokes his head in when he's doing a round near this side of the building. The footsteps came closer, then stopped right outside the door. I remember just sitting there, waiting for someone to appear in the little window or push the door open. But nothing happened. After maybe 10 seconds, I stood up and looked out into the hallway. The motion sensor lights hadn't even come on. It was completely dark and completely empty. No one there at all. I stepped out a little farther, thinking maybe somebody had just turned the corner toward the stairwell before I got there. Still nothing. At that point, I pulled out my phone and texted the security officer just to check. He wrote back almost right away and said he'd been near the auditorium the entire evening and hadn't come anywhere near my hallway. I tried to laugh it off and tell myself it was just the building settling. Older schools make all kinds of strange noises, and I know that. But when I sat back down at my desk, I heard it again. One more step. Just a single footstep. Right outside the door. And then, nothing. Complete silence. I didn't stay to finish grading after that. I gathered my things, turned off the lights, and left a lot earlier than I'd planned. So this happened when I was around 16, and honestly, it's still one of those moments I think about because I've never been able to explain it. It was pretty late, maybe close to 1 in the morning. I was sitting on the floor in my room near the door, just scrolling on my phone in the dark. The lights were off, and the only thing lighting up the room was my screen. After a little while, I heard footsteps outside my room. I figured it was probably my mom coming to check if I was still awake, so I quickly climbed into bed and pretended to be asleep. My bedroom door was locked from the inside, and the key was still in the lock on my side, exactly where I'd left it. A few seconds later, I heard 2 soft but very clear knocks on the door. I stayed completely still and didn't answer because I thought if my mom believed I was asleep, she'd just walk away. Then everything went silent. No more footsteps, no voices, nothing. I set my phone beside me on the mattress, closed my eyes, and eventually fell asleep. But the really weird part didn't happen until the next morning. When I woke up, my bedroom door was standing wide open. The key was still in the inside lock, just like it had been the night before. And that's what made no sense to me, because with the key in there, the door shouldn't have been able to be unlocked from the outside. Later, I asked my mom if she had come to my room that night, or if she'd somehow opened the door in the morning. She told me she hadn't. And then I noticed something else. My phone, the one I had left right next to me before I went to sleep, wasn't on the bed anymore. I found it under the bed, almost right in the center underneath. Not near the edge like it had slipped off, but far enough in that it looked more like someone had placed it there. For a while, I tried to come up with a logical explanation. I even wondered if maybe I'd done it in my sleep. But I've never sleepwalked in my life, not before that night and not after. And when I woke up, I was still in basically the same position I'd fallen asleep in. Even the blanket barely looked disturbed. I still can't explain what happened that night. And honestly, even now, telling it out loud still gives me chills. About 1.5 years ago, I saw something that still doesn't sit right with me, and honestly, I still can't explain it. We live out in the country, where the houses are spaced pretty far apart, maybe an acre or so between most of them. Usually, I just let my dog Tucker go outside by himself at night and wait for him to come back in. But this one evening was so calm and pleasant that I decided to stay out there with him for a minute. I'd only been outside maybe half a minute when I suddenly felt this low, heavy vibration. I could hear it too, but it wasn't like it was coming from one direction. It felt like it was all around me, almost like the air itself was humming. I could feel it deep in my chest. It didn't build up or fade away. It was just there, steady and strong, for maybe 5 or 6 seconds. And then, right after that, the whole sky lit up with this intense, pinkish violet flash. It was so bright it washed over everything, like nighttime had just been flipped inside out for a second. I could tell it came from somewhere beyond the right side of my house, up in the sky. But the strange part was, there was no sound at all when it happened. None. I took off around the side of the house, hoping I'd catch whatever caused it. But by the time I got there, it was gone. Then, almost immediately, that same vibration started again. Same exact feeling, same exact hum, same length of time. I backed up under the carport because at that point I was thinking, maybe this was some kind of bizarre lightning or electrical thing. But this time, after the vibration stopped, nothing followed. No flash, no sound, just silence. I looked around right away to see if anyone else nearby might have stepped outside or noticed it too. From our place, I can only see a couple of neighboring houses, and everything looked still. No porch lights, no people, not even a car going by. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone on me, and I really wanted my wife to come outside in case it happened again. I didn't want to run inside and miss it, so I started tossing little stones up at our bedroom window to get her attention. I must have looked ridiculous, but whatever it was, it never came back. One detail that still sticks with me is our cats. We've got a couple of indoor-outdoor cats, and when they're outside, they usually couldn't care less about us. They do their own thing and only come around when they feel like it. But right after that flash, both of the cats that had been outside came straight over and stayed right by my feet. They've never done that before, and they haven't done it since. The rest of that night, I just kept saying, I have no idea what that was. And the more I thought about it, the fewer explanations made sense. It didn't seem like lightning, not anything I've ever seen or heard. There aren't any transformers or major power lines in the direction the flash came from, and even if there were, the whole thing felt way too measured, too even, too deliberate. Plus, nothing in the house flickered. No lights dimmed, no power issues, nothing. So here I am, still thinking about it all this time later, still without an answer. I've tried searching online, and that got me nowhere. If somebody's seen something like that before, I'd genuinely love to hear what you think. Because as of now, I've still got nothing. When I was about 9, this happened to me. My older brother Caleb was a couple years ahead of me, and we were both close with another set of brothers whose family had this old farm way out in the country. They had an older brother too, but he was already driving and hardly ever home, so to us, he almost felt like some distant grown-up who belonged to another world. We spent a lot of weekends out there when we were kids. On this particular night, we were staying over. My brother and his friend decided they wanted to camp out downstairs in sleeping bags, while my buddy and I got the upstairs room with the bunk beds. At first, it was the kind of night you remember fondly as a kid. We were laughing over nothing, whispering back and forth long after we were supposed to be asleep, just enjoying that strange freedom kids feel when everyone else in the house is quiet. Then, underneath our talking, I started noticing something else. At first, I didn't say anything. I listened for a minute or two, trying to tell myself I was imagining it. But it kept going. "Do you hear that?" I asked, cutting my friend off in the middle of whatever story he was telling. He got quiet for a second and then said, "The footsteps?" That was the moment my stomach dropped, because now I knew it wasn't just me. Someone was walking in the hallway right outside our bedroom door. Back and forth. Slow, steady footsteps. We were the only ones sleeping upstairs, and from the thin strip of space under the door, I could see the hallway was completely dark. I asked him if maybe his older brother had come home after all, since his room was the only other bedroom up there. But he immediately said no. He wasn't supposed to be back that night. The footsteps kept going, so I finally decided I was going to look. At that point, I still wanted a normal explanation. I figured maybe our older brothers had snuck upstairs and were trying to mess with us. I slid quietly out of bed and crept over to the door. I turned the handle as slowly as I could and waited until the footsteps moved past the room. Then I opened the door just enough to peek through the crack, hoping I'd catch whoever it was before they noticed me. I looked into the hallway. There was no one there, and the footsteps stopped instantly. That's the part that got me. There was nowhere for anyone to go, no place to duck into, no time to hide. 1 second there had clearly been someone walking right outside the door, and the next second the hallway was empty. Even then, my mind refused to accept what that meant. I told myself it had to be my brother. Somehow he'd hidden. Somehow this was still a prank. My friend didn't want to leave the room, but I convinced him to come with me just far enough to check downstairs. I told him we'd just peek into the living room. If our brothers were there asleep, then maybe that would prove it had been them in the hall earlier. And besides, the stairs were in the opposite direction from where we'd last heard the footsteps, so in my head, that made it feel safer. The staircase had a little turn in it, a few steps down to a landing, then another longer stretch into the first floor. There was a small window by the landing letting in a little moonlight, but after that, the stairs dropped into darkness. I went first. I was moving slowly, but I didn't want to stop. I still had this awful feeling that something was behind us upstairs, and I just wanted to get downstairs and figure out what was going on. When I got near the bottom, my foot touched the last step, and in that exact second, something ran right in front of me. I didn't see a body. I didn't see a shadow. I didn't see anything at all. But it passed so close that I felt the air move against me as it rushed from one side to the other. It scared me so badly, I stumbled backward into my friend, and we both went down on the stairs in a heap. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Whatever had just passed us felt taller than I was, though at that age that wasn't saying much. Still, I knew it was there. I could feel it the way you feel somebody standing too close behind you even before you turn around. We both froze and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No movement. Just silence. My friend had reached his limit. He immediately started backing up the stairs, wanting nothing more to do with any of it. I told him I was at least going to look into the living room before I came back up. So he retreated to the bedroom, and I stayed there on the staircase, one hand gripping the railing like it was the only safe place left in the house. I leaned out just enough to see into the living room. To my left, I could make out my brother and his friend still asleep in their sleeping bags. And that thought hit me all at once. Whatever had just run in front of us had been in that room with them. I barely had time to process that before I turned and looked toward the kitchen. There was a big window there facing out toward the yard and driveway, and the outside light illuminated the area enough that I could see clearly. That's when I saw him. An older man was walking up the driveway toward the house. He looked maybe in his 50s. He was wearing old work coveralls with stitched patches on them, worn shoes, and a faded jacket that looked like it had been used hard for years. He had on an old-fashioned cap, the kind I'd never seen anyone actually wear in real life. Over one shoulder he carried a large sack, like burlap or canvas, and even that had a patch sewn onto it. But none of that was the strangest part. The strangest part was that everything about him, his clothes, his skin, even the sack, had this soft, glowing gray look to it. Not bright, not shining like a flashlight, just this pale, unreal glow, like he was lit from somewhere that didn't belong to the world around him. I stood there staring, completely frozen. My mind just stopped working. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't trying to explain it anymore. I knew, with the kind of certainty that only comes when fear strips everything else away, that I was looking at a ghost. The spell broke all at once, and I ran. I flew back up the stairs and into the bedroom where my friend was already in his bunk. I told him what I had seen, and I remember not needing to convince him. He could hear it in my voice. He could see it on my face. After that, the whole mood of the night changed. No more whispering, no more laughter. Just silence, tension, and the desperate hope that morning would come quickly. At some point, somehow, we fell asleep. The next morning, neither of us said a word about it. We were kids. We figured nobody would believe us, especially not the younger boys. And honestly, I don't think I was ready to hear myself say it out loud. We were all sitting in the living room watching TV when their mom walked in behind us. She was one of those genuinely kind people, always patient, always smiling, the sort of person who made every room feel calmer just by being in it. But that morning, there was no smile. She looked pale, worn out, like she hadn't slept at all. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she didn't even really look at us. She just stared across the room and asked, very quietly, "Did any of you boys see someone walking around last night?" The room went still. We all just shook our heads. She didn't say anything else. She turned around and walked away, and the second she left, it all clicked for me. She hadn't asked that casually. She knew something had happened, or at the very least, she had heard or seen enough herself to ask. But I never told her what I saw. What I do know is that night changed something in me. At the time, I didn't have language for it. I just knew that the world suddenly felt bigger, stranger, and far less explainable than it had the day before. That night at the farm was the first thing that ever happened to me that I truly couldn't explain away, and it wouldn't be the last. Years have passed since then. I've had other experiences, other moments that made me question what we think is possible. But that night remains the one I always come back to. Maybe because I was so young. Maybe because it was the first crack in the ordinary world. Or maybe because some part of me is still that kid standing on the stairs, gripping the railing, staring into the dark, trying to make sense of something impossible. And even now, after all these years, telling it still makes my heart beat a little faster. So this happened a few years ago, and even now, I still don't really know what to make of it. My mom, Elaine, was first diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer in 2015. About a year later, the doctors found several lesions on her brain, and not long after that, we lost her. It all happened so fast, but at the same time, it felt like we'd been living inside that grief forever. At the time, we'd only recently moved to a little village in the Irish countryside. I still remember the morning my dad told me she was gone. It was bright and quiet, one of those strangely beautiful mornings that feels completely wrong when something awful has just happened. I went out into the back garden because I didn't know what else to do. I just sat there in shock, feeling completely numb. And while I was sitting there, I noticed something odd about my shadow. The shape of my face, just for that moment, looked exactly like my mom's. That's what unsettled me so much. I don't actually resemble her that strongly. I take after my dad more. But somehow the outline in that shadow looked so much like her that it stopped me cold. As strange as that was, it wasn't the only thing that happened that morning. A little while later, I was still outside when my dog suddenly started acting nervous, staring toward the open back door. He was clearly reacting to something, so I got up and went inside to check. Right behind the door was an empty bin, and there was this scratching sound coming from inside it. My dog wouldn't go near it. I leaned over and looked in, and at the very bottom was a tiny shrew, trapped there and scrambling around, trying to get out. Now, on its own, that might not sound especially meaningful. But my dad used to tease my mom and tell her she had a sweet little shrew nose because her nose was so small and pointed. So finding a shrew there, the very morning after she passed, felt deeply strange. What made it even weirder was that the bin was tall and completely empty. There was nothing inside it that the shrew could have climbed on, and no obvious way it could have gotten in there in the first place. I called for my dad, and he came through from the other room. He's always been gentle with animals, so he carefully lifted the little shrew out in his hands, carried it into the garden, and let it go. And that was it. But it stayed with me. So on the morning my mom died, I saw what looked like her face in my shadow, and then not long after, I found a shrew. The exact little nickname my dad had for her, trapped in a place it didn't seem like it could have gotten into on its own. We lived in the countryside, yes, and there were animals around all the time. But that is the only shrew I've ever seen there, before or since. Even now, I don't know how to explain it. I know grief can affect the way we see things, and I understand that the mind can reach for patterns when we're hurting. But even my dad, who's a very practical person and not remotely spiritual, found the whole shrew thing unsettling. I'm not saying I think my mom came back as a shrew or anything like that. I just can't shake the feeling that those moments meant something. Maybe not in a literal, supernatural way, but enough to make me feel, just for a moment, that she was still close. So, growing up, I was always moving back and forth between England and Ireland because my family was spread across both places. And no matter where we were living, there was one thing I could always count on. Sooner or later, someone in the family would decide it was time to visit a castle. Honestly, I saw so many castles as a kid that I lost track of them years ago. Most of the ones I visited in England were with my grandparents, and those were the big, impressive ones. The kind that looked like they'd been frozen in time. But once I was living in Ireland again, those outings got replaced by what my dad liked to call castle hunting. My dad, well, let's call him Declan, loved tracking down forgotten ruins out in the middle of nowhere. The thing is, I didn't really enjoy those trips as much. The places he found were usually nothing like the grand English castles I'd grown used to. A lot of them were more like old fortified manor houses or half-collapsed ruins from centuries ago. Ireland absolutely has incredible castles, of course, but many of the famous ones are either privately owned or packed with visitors. Declan preferred the lonely, overlooked places, the ones nobody else seemed interested in. One day, he found one online that was somewhere near the border of Leinster and Munster. I still can't remember exactly where it was. If I had to guess now, I'd say maybe somewhere in County Tipperary or nearby. Wherever it was, it felt completely remote. After about an hour and a half of driving, we ended up pulling over beside this quiet little field with sheep in it. And the reason we stopped there was because the ruin we were looking for was sitting right inside that field. The moment I saw it, I knew this place was different from the others we'd visited. This wasn't some tiny, underwhelming fortified house. It was a proper ruin. Tall stone walls, battered by time, with 2 round towers still standing, while the others had long since fallen away. No one had restored it. No signs, no ropes, no effort to tidy it up. It was covered in ivy and tangled vegetation, like the land was slowly reclaiming it. But somehow, that made it even more striking. We climbed into the field and started exploring, and almost right away, I noticed this opening leading into a completely dark room, or maybe a chamber, I'm not even sure. What I do remember is how black it was. I mean, truly black. I couldn't see a single thing beyond the entrance. I've always hated dark places. That kind of darkness makes my stomach turn. But standing there, I felt something I'd never felt before. I was scared, absolutely. But at the same time, I had this intense urge to go in. Not curiosity exactly. Or not just curiosity. It felt more like I was being drawn toward it. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Like something in that darkness wanted me to step forward. And as frightened as I was, the pull toward it felt just as strong. That was what unsettled me most. Usually, fear would win instantly. But this time, it was like fear and attraction were perfectly balanced. In the end, I tore myself away and kept exploring the rest of the ruin. A little later, I found another entrance. This one wasn't quite as dark at first, so I could see that it led into some kind of passage or tunnel. And the second I looked at it, that same feeling came back, that same pull. I still don't know why, but this time I actually went in. I didn't have a phone light, no torch, nothing. I just walked forward until I reached the point where the daylight faded and the darkness began. And standing right there, at the edge of what I couldn't see, I felt it again. Stronger, maybe. That horrible, compelling sense that I should keep going. Like the darkness was inviting me in, or coaxing me in. But thankfully, my fear kicked in at the last moment. I backed out, got out of that tunnel, and went to find Declan. I told him about it, and he went in with his flashlight to have a look. I stayed outside, watching the beam of light move around inside. I expected him to go much farther than I had, but after only a short while, he came back out. When I asked why he'd turned around so quickly, he told me that right where the darkness started, there was a deep hole in the ground. At the bottom were jagged stones and broken brick. I remember just staring at him, because only a few minutes earlier, I had been standing right there. 1 or 2 more steps, maybe less, and I could have fallen straight into it. And the worst part was knowing how close I'd come to giving in to that strange urge to keep walking. We stayed a little longer, wandering around the ruin, and then eventually headed back to the car. On the drive home, I asked Declan if he'd explored that first dark chamber I'd been staring at earlier. Now, my dad was never someone I thought of as fearful. He was former military, the kind of man who'd climb onto the roof without a ladder just to fix a loose tile or repaint a chimney pot. Nothing seemed to shake him. But when I asked if he'd gone into that room, he surprised me. He said no. He told me he didn't like it in there, that even with the flashlight, he'd felt too uneasy to go in properly. That answer has stayed with me almost as much as the rest of it. Because I'd been in plenty of old castles and ruins before that day, I'd seen eerie stairwells, cold stone chambers, narrow passages, all of that. But this place felt different. It didn't just feel creepy. It felt active somehow, as though it was pressing itself against my mind, trying to lure me deeper inside. And I still think about that. Was it just my imagination? Was it the atmosphere, the isolation, the darkness, the suggestiveness of the place? Maybe. That's the sensible explanation, and maybe it's the right one. But part of me still wonders, because if it was only superstition, why did it feel so strong? And why did I nearly walk straight toward a hidden drop I couldn't even see? And why did my dad, of all people, refuse to enter that first room? I did try, years later, to figure out which ruin it had been. I searched through lists and photos of lesser-known Irish castles, but nothing I found looked quite right. I even asked Declan again, hoping he might remember, but too much time had passed. He thought he might still have photos buried somewhere on an old computer, though, so maybe one day I'll finally pin it down. But until then, it stays in my mind as this one strange, unforgettable place. And even now, I can't quite decide whether that castle was just an old ruin with a dangerous tunnel, or whether, for whatever reason, it really did seem to want me inside. Let me tell you about one night I still can't fully explain. Back when I was working overnight patrol, my sergeant had this habit of keeping us moving even on the quietest shifts. He hated dead time, so he'd come up with little games for us between calls. One of his favorites was hiding a sticky note somewhere on the window or door of a random business in town and making us find it as we drove our sectors. So that night, sometime a little after 2 in the morning, I was doing exactly that, rolling slow through empty streets, checking storefronts, sweeping alley lights across buildings, looking for anything out of place. It was one of those nights where everything feels too still, and you start paying attention to every shadow, every reflection, every tiny movement. When I got up toward the north end of town, I came up on an old auto repair shop. And I don't know how else to say it except that the closer I got, the worse I felt. My stomach tightened. My whole body started telling me something was wrong before I had any reason to prove it. I slowed the cruiser almost to a stop and stared through the grimy front windows. I was straining to see anything past the tint and the glare, and then I caught it. A man's silhouette moving slowly past a window on the far side of the building. The second I saw it, I called for backup. I kept my eyes on the front entrance until the other units got there. Once they arrived, 4 of us moved in and checked the perimeter. That's when we found the front door unsecured. The moment I stepped inside, I smelled it. That sharp, metallic scent you never forget once you've learned it. Blood. We cleared the building room by room. At first, nothing looked disturbed. No signs of a struggle, nothing obviously out of place. But when we got to the back office, we found a man slumped over a desk with a handgun still in his right hand. He had clearly been dead for a while, and all I could think was, then who did I just see? That question stuck with me the whole scene. Later, during a second search, I noticed a security camera mounted above a filing cabinet. We were able to get access to the footage through a business contact, and I told the detectives exactly what I thought I'd seen. But the video showed only one person. Just him. He had come in earlier that evening by himself, unlocked the shop, gone into the office, and taken his own life. No one else entered. No one else left. There was no mystery person on that recording. No intruder. No movement except his. When the medical examiner arrived, they recovered a note from his jacket pocket addressed to his wife, asking her to forgive him. For a long time after that, I couldn't sleep right. I hated driving past that stretch of road. Something about that night stayed with me. It changed the way I trust my instincts, but it also left me with a question I've never been able to answer. Because logically, I know what the evidence showed. I know what the footage proved. Every rational part of me accepts that he was alone in that building. And still, I know what I saw. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was some strange trick of light and timing. Or maybe it was something I'll never have a name for. All I know is that whatever I saw, or felt, led me straight to that shop that night. And I've never forgotten it. So I'm 20, and about a week ago, I moved into my apartment by myself for the first time. It's my first time living alone, and honestly, everything felt pretty normal in the beginning. I was settling in, getting used to the space, trying to enjoy the independence. Then a few nights ago, something started happening. At exactly 1:14 in the morning, I heard 3 knocks on my door. Not pounding, not frantic. Just 3 very calm, deliberate knocks. It instantly made me. I went to the peephole almost right away, but the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no sound of someone walking off, no elevator, nothing. It was just silence. At first, I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe somebody had the wrong apartment and realized it before I checked. I tried not to overthink it. But then the next night, it happened again. Same time, 1:14 a.m., same 3 knocks. This time I checked even faster, and still, there was no one there. I actually opened the door right after, and the hallway was completely empty. After that, it kept happening every night. Always 3 knocks, always at 1:14. Never during the day, never at any other hour. I started sitting quietly before that time, just waiting, trying to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. And every single night, right on cue, the knocks would come. I'd check, and again, nobody would be there. What got under my skin the most was how intentional it sounded. It wasn't random building noise or somebody being careless. It felt calm, measured, like whoever was doing it wasn't in any rush at all. I live alone, and I hadn't told anyone in the building because I kept wondering if I was making too much of it. But after a while, it started getting to me. Not because something huge was happening, but because of the waiting. That feeling of sitting there, knowing the time was getting closer, wondering if it was about to happen again. Every tiny sound in the apartment suddenly felt louder. Everything started to feel a little off. So I asked my friend Marcus to come stay over one night. I told him the whole thing, about the knocks, the exact timing, the empty hallway every time I looked. He didn't jump to some extreme conclusion or anything. He said it could be somebody messing around, or maybe someone confused and going to the wrong door, but he agreed it was strange, especially because it kept happening the same way. And honestly, just having another person there helped a lot. I didn't feel nearly as part. I'd also been thinking about whether I should open the door or not. A lot of people would probably say, never open it, and I get that. But the part that was really getting to me was not knowing. My mind was filling in the blanks, and that was making it worse. So I decided that if it happened again, I would wait until the second knock and then open the door, as long as Marcus was with me. That night, we waited. Everything was quiet for a while, and I started wondering if maybe it wouldn't happen this time. But then, right on time, we heard it. Knock. We looked at each other because we both heard it clearly. Then there was and then the second knock. So I walked to the door and opened it. It was my neighbor. I didn't really know him. I'd only seen him once before in passing when I first moved in. He lives alone in the apartment next to mine. When I opened the door, he looked confused, kind of disoriented, like he hadn't fully processed where he was. He wasn't aggressive, and he didn't seem like he was trying to scare me. He just looked lost. And that was it. It wasn't some person targeting me. It wasn't anything sinister. It was just a really unsettling situation with someone who wasn't fully aware of what he was doing in those moments. I didn't want to pry too much into his personal life because that didn't feel right. But it did explain everything. The timing, the strange pattern, and why it felt so eerie while still making no sense. So yeah, I know that's probably not the dramatic ending people might expect, but in a weird way, I'm grateful it turned out to be something explainable. The fear was really coming from not knowing. Now that I understand what was happening, I don't feel scared in the same way anymore. If it happens again, I'll handle it differently, because at least now I know where it's coming from.